Hello, and welcome to Entangled, the podcast where we explore the science of consciousness, the true nature of reality, and what it means to be a spiritual being having a human experience. I'm your host, Jordan Youkilis, and this is part 2 of The Great Work. In part 1, I described the multi-generational plans laid by the deep state to consolidate power and control in advance of the day they would reveal their methods on the Great Political Smash. We started with the discussion of the Fabian Socialists and the deep state's method of gradualism. We then described secrecy, hierarchy, and the ruling society of the cabal, the Committee of 300. Next, we asked, does P head the Committee of 300? Part 2 begins with the sordid history of central banks, crisis initiation, organized crime, and war in America. We continue with how the children of light throw the Olympians into the abyss. We conclude part 2 with the discussion of the great work and the path of initiation. Music from the show is available on the Spotify playlist Entangled the Vibes. If you like the show, please drop a 5-star review and subscribe on Substack, Spotify, X, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please enjoy the episode. Central banks, crisis initiation, organized crime, and war. The boilerplate narrative of the first American Revolution is that a group of ragtag American patriots, under the leadership of General George Washington, defeated the far stronger British military. The truth is more nuanced. The war was fought between American Continental and French forces against British, Hessian, and American Loyalist forces. On the Continental Army, we had approximately 230 to 250,000 soldiers. The Army never exceeded 48,000 at one time, and it seldom had more than 20,000 in the field. State militias made up the remaining 145 to 165,000 throughout the war, providing irregular support and local defenses. In addition to the Continental Army, the Allied forces fought alongside them. From France, we had over 12,000 soldiers deployed to North America by war's end. From Spain, we had several thousand troops that were involved in the North American and Gulf Coast campaigns, where Spain focused on peripheral theaters rather than a direct alliance with the US. The Netherlands provided financial aid and trade support, but no significant direct troop deployments to North America, and was involved in naval clashes after Britain declared war in 1780. And Native American allies, including some tribes like the Oneida and Tuscarora, supported the Patriots, contributing several hundred to a few thousand warriors. Against them fought the British forces, which globally Britain had 121,000 troops and 171,000 sailors in 1781. The British regulars made up approximately 42,000 troops that served in North America, with a peak of between 22,000 to 32,000 troops in the theater. British allies fought alongside the British, including the Loyalists or the American Tories. There were about 25,000 who fought for Britain, forming militias and regiments representing roughly 20% of the colonial population in certain areas. The Hessians, or German auxiliaries, had nearly 30,000 troops from the German states like Hesse, Kassel, and Brunswick, with about 18,000 troops from Hesse alone. And Native American allies fought alongside the British as well, with approximately 13,000 warriors, including 1,500 from the Iroquois tribes and others like the Cherokee, Muskogee, and Seminole tribes. The American Revolutionary War was part of a larger global struggle, often called the Second Hundred Years' War, between Britain and its rivals. France's entry in 1778 transformed the American colony's revolution with battles spanning the globe. This stretched British resources thin, contributing to their defeat in America. It is for this reason, and others which I'll get to shortly, that another way to view the First American Revolution is as the Western Front of World War II. Over the next 2.5 centuries, the ties between central bankers, human traffickers, and drug traffickers and the war machine would strengthen. In Eustace Mullen's book, The World Order, he details the instrumental role the patriarch of the Rothschild family, Meyer Amschel, played in financing the Hessian mercenaries that fought against the American Continental Army. Quote, born in Frankfurt in 1743, Meyer Amschel married Gutta Schnapper. He served a 3-year apprenticeship in Hanover at the Bank of Oppenheim. During this period, he had occasion to be of service to Lieutenant General Baron von Estorff. Von Estorff was the principal advisor to Landgrave Frederick II of Hesse, the wealthiest man in Europe. Frederick was worth from 70 to 100 million florins, much of it inherited from his father, Wilhelm VIII, brother of the King of Sweden. Baron von Estorff advised the Landgrave that Mayor Amschel showed an uncanny ability to increase money through his investments. The Landgrave immediately sent for him. At the time, King George III was trying to put down the American Rebellion. His troops were being outfought by the hardy Americans, who were accustomed to wilderness battles. Mayer Amschel arranged for King George to hire 16,800 sturdy young Hessian soldiers from the Landgrave, a considerable addition to the Hesse's fortune. This advantageous relationship came to a halt with the sudden death in 1785 of the Landgrave, who was only 25 years old. However, Mayer Amschel obtained absolute influence over his successor, Elector Wilhelm I, who, like Mayer Amschel, had also been born in 1743. It was said that they were almost like two shoes, so well did they go together. It was a pleasant change from Mayer Amschel's relationship with the former Landgrave, who had been a very difficult and demanding person. In fact, the Landgrave's sudden death had luckily placed Mayer Amschel in charge of the largest fortune in Europe. End quote. William Guy Carr continues with the history of war profiteers and central bankers in Pawns in the Game. Quote, in order to understand how men who obtained control of the Bank of England and the British national debt also obtained control of the trade and commerce and the monetary system of Britain's American colonies, it will be sufficient if we pick up the threads of the story at the time Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, went over to England to represent the interests of the men who had been associated with him in building up the prosperity of the American colonies. Robert L. Owen, former chairman, Committee of Banking and Currency on the United States Senate, explains the matter on page 98 of Senate document number 23. He states that when associates of the Rothschilds asked Franklin how he accounted for the prosperous conditions prevailing in the colonies, he replied, "That is simple. In the colonies we issue our own money. It is called colonial script. We issue it in proper proportion to the demands of trade and industry." Robert L. Owen remarked that not very long after the Rothschilds heard of this, they realized the opportunity to exploit the situation with considerable profit to themselves. The obvious thing to do was to have a law passed prohibiting the colonial officials from issuing their own money and to make it compulsory for them to obtain the money they required through the medium of the banks. Mayer Amschel Rothschild was still in Germany, but he was supplying the British government with mercenary troops at £8 per man. Such was his influence that in 1764 he succeeded, through the directors of the Bank of England, in having his laws passed in accordance with his dictates. The authorities in the colonies had to discard their script money. They had to mortgage the colonial assets and securities to the Bank of England in order to borrow the money they needed to carry on business. Referring to those facts, Benjamin Franklin stated, in 1 year the conditions were so reversed that the era of prosperity ended and a depression set in to such an extent that the streets of the colonies were filled with unemployed. Franklin stated, the Bank of England refused to give more than 50% of the face value of the script when turned over as required by law. The circular medium of exchange was thus reduced by half. Mr. Franklin disclosed the primary cause of the revolution when he said, the colonies would gladly have borne the little tax on teas and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction became general, but very few colonials realized that the taxation and other economic sanctions being imposed on them was the result of the activities of a small group of international gangsters who had succeeded in obtaining control of the British Treasury after they had obtained control of the Bank of England. It had already been shown how they jumped Britain's national debt from $1.25 million in 1694 to $16 million in 1698, and increased it progressively to $885 million by 1815 and $22.5 billion by 1945. On April 19, 1775, the first armed clashes between British and colonials took place at Lexington and Concord. On May 10th, the Second Continental Congress met at Philadelphia, and George Washington was placed as the head of the naval and military forces. He took command at Cambridge. On July 4th, 1776, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. For the next 7 years, the international moneylenders urged and financed the colonial war. The Rothschilds made plenty of money supplying the British with German Hessian soldiers with which to fight the colonialists. The average Brit had no quarrel with his American cousins. He secretly sympathized with them. On October 19, 1781, the British commander General Cornwallis surrendered his whole army, including what was left of the Hessians. On September 3, 1783, the independence of the United States was recognized by the Peace Treaty of Paris. The only real losers were the British people. Their national debt had been increased tremendously, and the international moneylenders, who were in reality the secret power behind the world revolutionary movement, had succeeded in the first stage of their long-range plans toward the dissolution of the British Empire. The agents of the international bankers worked industriously to prevent unity. By keeping the various states in America separated, it was much easier to exploit them. To prove the continuity of the foreign moneylenders meddling in the affairs of every nation, it is sufficient to record that the founding fathers of the United States meeting at Philadelphia in 1787 talked over the importance of bringing in some form of legislation which would protect them against the exploitation of the international bankers. The agents of the international bankers organized active lobbying. They used intimidation. But despite all their efforts, paragraph 5 of section 8 of the first article of the new American Constitution read, "Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof." The vast majority of the United States citizens consider the Constitution an honored and almost sacred document. All laws passed since then are supposed to conform with the provisions of the Constitution. The fact that subsequent legislation dealing with finance and currency have been in violation of the provisions laid down in Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5 proves how powerful the bankers have been in the political field. The history of how the international moneylenders obtained economic control of the United States in order to fulfill their long-range plans is decidedly interesting. Using the good old reliable joint stock company principle, the directors of the Bank of England appointed one of their hirelings named Alexander Hamilton to represent their interests in the United States. In 1780, this man, a supposed patriot, proposed the establishment of a federal bank. It was to be owned by private interest as an alternative to those who insisted the issue and control of money should remain in the hands of the government elected by the people. Alexander Hamilton suggested that his proposed federal bank be capitalized for $12 million. The Bank of England would provide $10 million, the remaining $2 million would be allocated by wealthy people in America. In 1783, Alexander Hamilton and his business partner, Robert Morris, organized the Bank of North America. As financial superintendent of the Continental Congress, Morris was able to reduce the United States Treasury to a state of indigence by the end of 7 years of war. This is another illustration of how the secret power used wars to further their plans for the world revolutionary movement. To make absolutely sure the United States financial cupboard was bare, Hamilton transferred the last $250,000 from the Treasury Department and invested it in the bank's capital stock. The directors of the Bank of North America were agents of the Bank of England. The Illuminati controlled both. The fact that they sold their souls to Satan in order to gain the world is the truth they wish to conceal. The fathers of American independence realized that if the directors of the Bank of England obtained monopolistic control of America's money system, they would recover any money they had lost by the simple process of mortgage and foreclosure. The net result of this struggle for economic control of the nation was that Congress refused to grant the Bank of North America a charter. Benjamin Franklin died in 1790, and the agents of the international Jewish moneylenders immediately made another bid to obtain control of America's finances. They succeeded in having Alexander Hamilton appointed Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton had the government charter the bank his principals had been clamoring for. It was then a simple matter to usurp the rights to issue currency based on public and private debts. The most forceful arguments the bankers' agents had used to defeat their opposition was that money issued by Congress on the credit of the nation would be valueless in dealing abroad, while money obtained on loan from the bankers at interest would be welcome as legal security in all kinds of transactions. Thus, the public fell prey to the exploitation of the men who professed to be their friends. Alexander Hamilton and Robert Morris were never more than hirelings of the international moneylenders. The new bank was capitalized for $35 million. Of this amount, $28 million was subscribed by European bankers, which the Rothschilds controlled. It is suspected that the international bankers decided that Hamilton knew too much and couldn't be trusted any longer. He was inveigled into a duel with an expert named Aaron Burr, who acted as his executioner. While American citizens were used as frontmen by their international bankers, policy was determined in Europe. The Rothschild interest gave orders that the American bankers were to extend almost unlimited credit for good security and put plenty of money into circulation. The propaganda media played up the highest notes of optimism. Prosperity was assured. The Americans were destined to become the greatest people on earth. Everybody was urged to invest in the future of this great nation. When everyone of any worth had mortgaged himself to the hilt, orders were given to tighten up credits, recall outstanding loans, and reduce the amount of money in circulation. An artificial depression was created. Citizens could not meet their financial obligations, and the money barons obtained millions of dollars worth of property and securities at a fraction of their nominal value. Admittedly, everything was done by process of law, but Al Capone and his gangsters were gentlemen in comparison with the international bankers. The international bankers expected serious opposition when the charter for the Bank of the United States ran out in 1811. To prepare for this eventuality, Meyer Amschel Rothschild had obtained absolute control of the Bank of England in order to strengthen his control of the world's economy. His son Nathan had been specially trained to undertake the tremendous task as previously mentioned. Nathan proved to have exceptional talent and ability for financial affairs. He trained himself only to think in terms of profits, just as the professional politician thinks only in terms of votes. In 1798, at the early age of 21, he went over from Germany to secure control of the Bank of England. He was entrusted with the modest sum of £20,000. To demonstrate his financial wizardry, he speculated, and in a comparatively short time of 3 years, he increased his capital to £60 million. In 1811, when the matter of the renewal of the charter for the Bank of America was due for a hearing, Nathan Rothschild was in control of the international bankers. He issued his ultimatum. Either the application for the renewal of the charter is granted, or the United States will find itself involved in a most disastrous war. President Andrew Jackson didn't believe the international bankers would foment a war. He decided to call their bluff. He told them bluntly, "You are a den of vipers. I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out. If the people only understood the rank injustice of our money and banking system, there would be a revolution before morning." But President Jackson had underestimated the power of the Rothschilds. Nathan Rothschild issued orders. Teach these impudent Americans a lesson. Bring them back to colonial status. The British government of that British Empire which the money power wanted to dissolve, always subservient to the Bank of England, launched the War of 1812. This war was calculated to impoverish the United States to such an extent the legislators would have to plead for peace and seek financial aid. Nathan Rothschild stipulated that no financial aid would be forthcoming except in return for the renewal of the charter for the Bank of North America. Nathan Rothschild's plan worked to perfection. It mattered not to him how many men were killed and wounded, how many women were widowed, how many children were made orphans, how many people were rendered destitute. He and his co-conspirators rejoiced in the fact that they had achieved their objective, and in so doing had created more and more dissatisfaction amongst the masses of people who blamed the blundering policies of their own governments, while the secret power behind the scenes remained unsuspected by all but except a very few people. In 1816, the United States Congress granted the renewal of the charter of the Second Bank of the United States as requested. There are many authorities who state quite frankly that the members of Congress were bribed or threatened into voting for the legislation which put American people back into financial bondage. The men who plot and plan to secure economic and political control of the world don't hesitate to prostitute love to achieve their ends, any more than they hesitate to order murder committed to rid them of men who stand in their way. In 1857, the marriage of Lenora, the daughter of Lionel Rothschild, to her cousin Alfonso of Paris, they believe in keeping things within the family, brought many international personages to London, England, where the ceremony was performed. Benjamin Disraeli, the noted English statesman who was made Prime Minister in 1868 and again in 1874, was invited to be present. Disraeli is reported to have said during his speech on that memorable occasion, "Under this roof are the heads of the family of Rothschild, a name famous in every capital of Europe and every division of the globe. If you like, we shall divide the United States into 2 parts, one for you, James, and one for you, Lionel. Napoleon will do exactly and all that I advise him to do, and to Bismarck will be suggested such an intoxicating program as to make him our abject slave." History records that Judah P. Benjamin, a Rothschild relative, was appointed as a professional strategist in America. The American Civil War, which split the Union in 2, became an accomplished fact. Napoleon III was persuaded by the bankers to extend his French Empire into Mexico. The British government was persuaded by that the northern states could be made into a colony again. The Civil War in the United States was an economic war brought about by the international bankers. By applying economic pressure, it was a simple matter to aggravate the economic difficulties the northern states encountered after the slaves had been given their freedom. Abraham Lincoln admitted no nation can long endure half slave and half free. The international bankers loaned unlimited credit to all forces engaged by the South fighting the forces of the North. They loaned Napoleon III 201.5 million francs for his Mexican campaign. When the Confederacy needed assistance in 1863, the powers that be offered Napoleon Texas and Louisiana in exchange for French intervention against the northern states. The Tsar of Russia heard of these preposterous offers, and he informed the governments of England and France that they should actively intervene and give military aid to the South. Russia would consider such actions as a declaration of war against the Imperial Russian Empire. To strengthen his ultimatum, Russian warships were sent to New York and San Francisco and placed at Lincoln's disposal. When the northern authorities found themselves in financial difficulties, the international bankers didn't refuse to loan the money. They simply stipulated that the rate of interest to the northern states would be 28%. After all, they were in the business as moneylenders. An important aspect of the American Civil War is that it would, in all probability, have reached a conclusion in a few months had not the international moneylenders made fresh loans. They were based on terms and rates of interest which were calculated to give international bankers control of the economy and of the whole country. When they considered it time, they ended the war. Lincoln tried to break the financial bonds with which his northern states were bound. To him, Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5 of the Constitution was sufficient authority. He disregarded the bankers' overtures. He caused $450 million of honest money to be printed. He placed the credit of the nation as security behind his money. The international bankers retaliated by causing a bill to be passed through Congress, ruling that Lincoln's greenbacks would not be accepted as payment of interest on government bonds nor import duties. The bankers caused Lincoln's money to become almost valueless by refusing to accept the greenbacks except at a heavy discount. Having beaten down the value of greenback dollars to 30 cents, they bought them all in. They then turned around and bought government bonds with them demanding dollar for dollar value. In this way, they overcame a serious threat and made 70 cents on the dollar. An article inspired by the international bankers appeared in the London Times. It concerned Abraham Lincoln's issue of greenbacks. It said, "If this mischievous financial policy, which has its origin in North America, shall become indurated down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without costs. It will pay off debts and be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its own commerce. It will become prosperous without precedent in the history of the world. The brains and wealth of all countries will go to North America. That country must be destroyed or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe." The bankers financed the election campaigns of enough senators and congressmen to ensure them that the National Banking Act would become law. The National Banking Act did become law in 1863, despite the vigorous protests of President Lincoln. Thus, the international bankers won another round. The people of the world had been brought one step nearer to economic, political, and religious bondage. The American bankers put into practice once again the manipulations mentioned. They reaped another harvest by foreclosures on property and securities, which left them as security for loans, which their clients could not repay because the bankers, acting in unity, withdrew currency and restricted credits to a degree that made it impossible for the vast majority of borrowers to meet their financial obligations. Abraham Lincoln felt that after this sad and costly experience, the American people might be ready to listen to sense, so once again, he launched a public attack upon the bankers. In an address, he said, "I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. Corporations have been enthroned, an era of corruption in high places will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed." Shortly after making this momentous speech, Abraham Lincoln was reelected president, but before he could have legislation enacted that would have curbed the avaricious practices of the bankers, he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth while attending a theatrical performance on the night of April 14, 1865. Very few Americans know why President Lincoln was assassinated. The true answer was found when investigators located a coded message amongst Booth's effects. The key to that coded message was in possession of Judah P. Benjamin, who was Rothschild's agent in America. While the coded message had no direct bearing on the murder, it definitively established the contact Booth had with the international bankers. Once again, they remained hidden behind the scenes, while the Jew, Booth, was blamed for the death of a great man. Had Abraham Lincoln lived, he would most certainly have clipped the wings and trimmed the sails of the international moneylenders. Before Lincoln was murdered, Salmon P. Chase, who was Secretary of the U.S. Treasury from 1861 to 1864, stated publicly, "My agency in promoting the passage of the National Banking Act was the greatest financial mistake of my life. It has built up a monopoly which affects every interest in the country. It should be repealed, but before that can be accomplished, the people will be arrayed on one side and the banks on the other in a contest such as we have never seen before in this country." In 1866, there was $1.9 billion in currency in circulation in the United States. This represents $50.46 per capita. At the end of 1876, there was only about 605 million in circulation, representing a per capita amount of $14.6. The currency of the nation had been reduced by bank withdrawals to the extent of over $1.3 billion. The importance of these figures will be better understood by the average man when he learns that the net result of the bankers' policy was a total of 56,446 business failures, representing a loss of $2.2 billion in cash investments. The larger proportion of the losses were incurred by mortgage foreclosures. In other words, by withdrawing currency and restricting credits, the bankers had enriched themselves by well over $2 billion in a little over 10 years. There is plenty of evidence to prove that the American bankers and the European bankers have been affiliated ever since, and that the subsequent depressions were created by similar financial manipulations. End quote. I can't speak to Mel K's earlier claims that Lincoln was a Rothschild, nor whether he could have chartered another course that held the Union together without civil war. But I firmly believe the latter years of his life were guided by a higher power and a desire to rid America from the bondage of debt enslavement and sexual blackmail. His attempts to bring defeat to the bankers may have led to Lincoln's tragic death, but his spirit survives in patriots around the world who carry on that quest for truth, unity, and liberty. The war left the reunified republic in shambles, crippled by debt. The USA received a bit of help from the UK, who agreed to settle an arbitration claim of $15.5 million. This claim was related to damages to American shipping caused by British-built warships, as well as illegal fishing in Canadian waters and British civilian losses in the American Civil War. I wonder if there could be more to this 1871 Treaty of Washington. Do you think that $15.5 million payout could have actually been some form of money laundering and or bribery? It'd be like if when President Obama entered into the JCPOA agreement with Iran, he'd also paid that state sponsor of terror $1.7 billion in pallets of cash. The same year the Treaty of Washington was signed, Congress enacted and President Ulysses S. Grant signed into law the District of Columbia Organic Act. This legislation fundamentally restructured governance in Washington, D.C. by consolidating previously separate entities into a unified territorial government. Effective June 1, 1871, it repealed the charters of the cities of Washington and Georgetown, transferring their property, debts, and responsibilities to the new district government. Now, did you know that there are crazy conspiracy theorists out there who claim that the effective result of the Organic Act and the Treaty of Washington was to convert the United States into a corporation and to sell that corporation back to the British Crown? Totally bonkers, I know. Did you know that Washington, D.C., Vatican City, and the City of London, also known as the Bankers' State, are all sovereign entities? I wonder if there's any geopolitical significance to this fact. Let's continue with the history of central banks, crisis initiation, and war in the United States. Here is a section from Eustace Mullen's book, The Secrets of the Federal Reserve. Quote, "The most powerful men in the United States were themselves answerable to another power, a foreign power, and a power which had been steadfastly seeking to extend its control over the young republic of the United States since its very inception. This power was the financial power of England, centered in the London branch of the House of Rothschild. The fact was that in 1910, the United States was for all practical purposes being ruled from England, and so it is today. The 10 largest holding companies in the United States are firmly in the hands of certain banking houses, all of which have branches in London. They are J.P. Morgan Company, Brown Brothers Harriman, Warburg, Kuhn Loeb, and J. Henry Schroeder. All of them maintain close relationships with the House of Rothschild, principally through the Rothschild control of international money markets through its manipulation of the price of gold. Each day, the world price of gold is set in the London offices of N.M. Rothschild and Company. Although these firms are ostensibly American firms which merely maintain branches in London, the fact is that these banking houses actually take their direction from London. Their history is a fascinating one and unknown to the American public, originating as it did in the international traffic in gold, slaves, diamonds, and other contraband. There are no moral considerations in any business decision made by these firms. They are interested solely in money and power. Tourists today gape at the magnificent mansions of the very rich in Newport, Rhode Island, without realizing that not only do these cottages stand as a memorial to the baronial desires of our Victorian millionaires, but that their erection in Newport represented a nostalgic memorialization of the great American fortunes which had their beginnings in Newport when it was the capital of the slave trade. The slave trade for centuries had its headquarters in Venice until 17th century Britain, the new master of the seas, used its control of the oceans to gain a monopoly. As the American colonies were settled, its fiercely independent people, most of whom did not want slaves, found to their surprise that slaves were being sent to our ports in great numbers. The preeminence of J.P. Morgan and the Brown firm in American finance can be dated to the establishment of Baltimore as the 19th century capital of the slave trade. Both of these firms originated in Baltimore, opened branches in London, came under the aegis of the House of Rothschild, and returned to the United States to open branches in New York and to become the dominant power, not only in finance, but also in government. In recent years, key posts such as the Secretary of Defense have been held by Robert Lovett, partner of Brown Brothers Harriman, and Thomas S. Gates, partner of Drexel and Company, a J.P. Morgan subsidiary firm. The present Vice President, George H.W. Bush, is the son of Prescott Bush, a partner of Brown Brothers Harriman, for many years the senator from Connecticut and the financial organizer of Columbia Broadcasting System, of which he was also a director for many years. To understand why these firms operate as they do, it is necessary to give a brief history of their origins. Few Americans know that J.P. Morgan Company began as George Peabody and Company. George Peabody, 1795 to 1869, born at South Danvers, Massachusetts, began business in Georgetown, D.C. In 1814 as Peabody Riggs and Company, dealing in wholesale dry goods and in operating the Georgetown slave market. In 1815, to be closer to the source of supply, they moved to Baltimore, where they operated as Peabody and Riggs from 1815 to 1835. Peabody found himself increasingly involved with business originating from London, and in 1835 he established the firm of George Peabody and Company in London. He had excellent entree in London business through another Baltimore firm established in Liverpool, the Brown Brothers. Alexander Brown came to Baltimore in 1801 and established what is now the oldest banking house, now known as the oldest banking house in the United States, still operating as Brown Brothers Harriman of New York, Brown Shipley and Company of England, and Alex Brown and Son of Baltimore. The behind-the-scenes power wielded by this firm is indicated by the fact that Sir Montagu Norman, governor of the Bank of England for many years, was a partner of Brown, Shipley and Company. Considered the most single influential banker in the world, Sir Montagu Norman was organizer of informal talks between heads of central banks in 1927, which led directly to the great stock market crash of 1929. Soon after he arrived in London, George Peabody was surprised to be summoned to an audience with the gruff Baron Nathan Meyer Rothschild. Without mincing words, Rothschild revealed to Peabody that much of the London aristocracy openly disliked Rothschild and refused his invitations. He proposed that Peabody, a man of modest means, be established as a lavish host whose entertainment would soon be the talk of London. Rothschild would of course pay all the bills. Peabody accepted the offer and soon became known as the most popular host in London. His annual 4th of July dinner, celebrating America's independence, became extremely popular with the English aristocracy, many of whom, while drinking Peabody's wine, regaled each other with jokes about Rothschild's crudities and bad manners, without realizing that every drop they drank had been paid for by Rothschild. it is hardly surprising that the most popular host in London would also become a very successful businessman, particularly with the House of Rothschild supporting him behind the scenes. Peabody often operated with a capital of £500,000 on hand and became very astute in buying and selling on both sides of the Atlantic. His American agent was the Boston firm of Beebe, Morgan and Company, headed by Junius S. Morgan, father of John Pierpont, J.P. Morgan. Peabody, who never married, had no one to succeed him, and he was very favorably impressed by the tall, handsome Junius Morgan. George Peabody found that he had chosen well in selecting Junius S. Morgan as his successor. Morgan agreed to continue the sub rosa relationship with N.M. Rothschild Company and soon expanded the firm's activities by shipping large quantities of railroad iron to the United States. It was Peabody iron which was the foundation for much of American railroad tracks from 1860 to 1890. In 1864, content to retire and leave his firm in the hands of Morgan, Peabody allowed the name to be changed to Junius S. Morgan Company. The Morgan firm then and since has always been directed from London. John Pierpont Morgan spent much of his time at his magnificent mansion in London, Prince's Gate. Although the London house of Junius S. Morgan and Company continued to be the dominant branch of the Morgan enterprises, with the death of the senior Morgan in 1890 in a carriage accident on the Riviera, J.P. Morgan became the head of the firm. After operating as the American representative of the London firm from 1864 to 1871 as Dabney Morgan Company, J.P. Morgan took on a new partner in 1871, Anthony Drexel of Philadelphia, and operated as Drexel Morgan and Company until 1895. Drexel died in that year, and Morgan changed the name of the American branch to J.P. Morgan and Company. LaRoche tells us that on February 5, 1891, a secret association known as the Round Table Group was formed in London by Cecil Rhodes, his banker Lord Rothschild, the Rothschild-in-law Lord Rosebery, and Lord Curzon. He states that in the United States, the Round Table was represented by the Morgan Group. Dr. Carroll Quigley refers to this group as the British American Secret Society in Tragedy and Hope, stating that the chief backbone of this organization grew up along the already existing financial cooperation running from the Morgan Bank in New York to a group of international financiers in London led by Lazard Brothers in 1901. After World War I, the Round Table became known as the Council on Foreign Relations in the United States and the Royal Institute of International Affairs, or Chatham House, in London. The leading government officials of both England and the United States were chosen from its members. In the 1960s, as growing attention centered on the surreptitious government activities of the Council of Foreign Relations, subsidiary groups known as the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderbergers, representing the identical financial interests, began operations, with the more important officials, such as Robert Russa, being members of all three groups. End quote. The cabal's crowning achievement took place following a covert meeting in November of 1910, 3 years after they had orchestrated the Panic of 1907. 8 men conspired at Jekyll Island to craft a plan that resulted in the formation of the Federal Reserve. The 8 men in attendance at Jekyll Island were all acting as agents of the Rothschild family. They were Senator Nelson Aldrich, the father-in-law of John D. Rockefeller Jr. and head of the National Monetary Commission; Arthur Shelton, Aldrich's private secretary and special assistant of the National Monetary System; A. Piatt Andrew, assistant secretary of the Treasury; Frank Vanderlip, president of the National City Bank of New York; Charles D. Norton, president of First National Bank of New York; Henry P. Davison, senior partner of J.P. Morgan Co., Benjamin Strong of J.P. Morgan Co., and Paul Warburg, partner of Kuhn-Loeb & Company and one of the original members of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. The Federal Reserve Act was signed into law in 1913 by President Woodrow Wilson, whose election had been bought and paid for by the cabal. On Substack, I've included a political cartoon from 1912 arguing against the creation of the Fed, as it would result in an octopus monster that controls the White House, Congress, the U.S. Treasury, commercial banks, Wall Street, farming, and industry. This is exactly what has happened over the subsequent 112 years. Immediately after the Federal Reserve was created, the cabal began abusing the institution for their own self-interest. Here's Mullins explaining what happened next. Quote, "The first task of the Federal Reserve System would be to finance World War I. The European nations were already bankrupt because they had maintained large standing armies for almost 50 years, a situation created by their own central banks, and therefore they could not finance a war. A central bank always imposes a tremendous burden on the nation for rearmament and defense in order to create an indistinguishable debt, simultaneously creating a military dictatorship and enslaving the people to pay the interest on the debt which the bankers have artificially created. End quote. The men in control of the Fed went on to orchestrate, quote, second, the agricultural depression of 1920, third, the Black Friday crash on Wall Street of October 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression, fourth, World War II, fifth, the conversion of the assets of the United States and its citizens from real property to paper assets from 1945 to the present, transforming a victorious America and foremost world power in 1945 to the world's largest debtor nation. End quote. Dr. John Coleman explains in Conspirator's Hierarchy how the Committee of 300 has leveraged propaganda to orchestrate wars and to socially engineer society. Quote, opinion makers have played no small part in this war on the United States. We need to examine the role of the Committee of 300 in bringing about these far-reaching changes and how the social engineers have used central systems analyses to keep public opinion from expressing anything other than the policies of the invisible government. How and where did it all begin? From documents covering the First World War that I was able to gather and examine in the War Office in Whitehall, London, it appears that the Royal Institute for International Affairs was commissioned by the Committee of 300 to do a study of manipulating war information. This task was given to Lord Northcliffe and Lord Rothmere and Arnold Toynbee, who was MI6's agent of the IRIA. Lord Rothmere's family owned a newspaper which was used to support various government positions, so it was thought that the paper could change public perceptions, especially among the ranks of growing opposition to the war. Woodrow Wilson can be credited, if that is the proper expression to use, of jumping on the public opinion manipulators' bandwagon and using it to further the causes whispered in his ear by his controller, Colonel House. On instructions from President Wilson, or rather Colonel House, the Creel Commission was created, and as far as can be ascertained, the Creel Commission was the first organization in the United States to use the RIAA techniques and methodology for polling and mass propaganda. The psychological warfare experiments perfected at Wellington House were used in the Second World War with equal success and have been in continuous use in the massive psychological war against the United States which began in 1946. The methods did not change, only the target. Now it was not German worker housing, but the middle class of the United States that became the focus of the attack. Walter Lippmann was chosen to make the people of the United States like the Beatles when they arrived on our shores and were thrust upon an unsuspecting country. Combined with the propaganda sent forth night and day from radio and television, it was only a comparatively short time before the Beatles became popular. The technique of radio stations allegedly receiving hundreds of requests from imaginary listeners for Beatle music led to charts and ratings for first, then top 10, and gradually escalated until, by 1992, it has expanded to the top 40 on the charts. In 1928, Lippmann's compatriot Edward Bernays wrote a book called Crystallizing Public Opinion, and in 1928, a second book of his was published entitled simply Propaganda. In it, Bernays described his experiences at Wellington House. Bernays was a close friend of master manipulator H.G. Wells, whose many quasi-novels were used by Bernays to help formulate mass mind control techniques. Wells was not shy about his role as a leader in changing lower-class society, mainly because he was a close friend of members of the British royal family and spent a great deal of time with some of the most highly placed politicians of the day, men like Sir Edward Grey, Lord Haldane, Robert Cecil of the Jewish Cecil family that had controlled the British monarchy since Cecil became the private secretary and lover of Queen Elizabeth I, Leo Amory, Halford Mackinder of MI6 and later head of the London School of Economics, whose pupil Bruce Lockhart would become MI6 controller of Lenin and Trotsky during the Bolshevik Revolution, and even the great man himself, Lord Alfred Milner. End quote. Over the past century, the cabal has corrupted the most powerful institutions in the world: the military, the intelligence agencies, Fortune 500 companies, politics, Hollywood, academia, etc., often through blackmail by capturing elites in lewd sexual activities. Many of these elites are entrapped through sex with children. Concurrently, the cabal has orchestrated conflicts and revolutions across the globe, profiting from war debts, human trafficking, arms dealing, and drug smuggling in the process. On Substack, I've created a chart that shows how the banks represented at Jekyll Island, National City Bank, First National Bank, JP Morgan Company, and Kuhn Loeb & Co. subsequently became Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, and Barclays, respectively. I've also highlighted the Federal Reserve directors, Treasury secretaries, and banking executives who are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Finally, I've highlighted these institutions' ties to the Rothschild crime family and to corrupt intelligence asset, money launderer, arms dealer, human trafficker, and child rapist Jeffrey Epstein. The cabal has been skating downhill ever since the creation of the Federal Reserve. Except, of course, when they faced their first real threat since Lincoln and the Kennedy brothers. Like Lincoln, Jack and Bobby chose to stare down the cabal, ultimately losing their lives in the fight. But, as after Lincoln's assassination, their unending quest for truth, unity, and liberty lived on. Their fighting spirit carried forward into the next generation, the one who would ultimately defeat this cartel of satanic pedophiles. Thank you very much. Now, I love the principles on which our country was founded as much or more than anyone, and I've lived a life in admiration of what our founding fathers accomplished. That said, as the exposure of the great work has forced us to revisit recent history, it's equally important that we do the same of our country's founding. Is it possible that the official story of the first American Revolution and the establishment of a constitutional republic of, by, and for the people was also a cover story? That this revolution, which as previously discussed could be considered the Western Front of World War Zero, was intentionally orchestrated by the cabal, as was the subsequent French Revolution and the English Revolution the century prior. Could the revolution have been the start of a 250-year process, which would include 3 orchestrated world wars that ended in a massive depopulation and control by one world government? Could this satanic organized crime syndicate have used the illusion of democracy to establish nation-states around the globe, while in reality the power remained in control of the old world monarchies and the central bankers? Did you know that in America's Treaty of Alliance with France in 1778, Article 11 states, quote, "The two parties guarantee mutually from the present time and forever against all other powers, to wit, the United States to His Most Christian Majesty, the present possessions of the Crown of France in America, as well as those which it may acquire by the future treaty of peace." End quote. Again, when the treaty promises His Most Christian Majesty the present and future possessions of the Crown of France in America, it's being addressed to the King of France. In 1778, that would have been King Louis XVI, the father of King Louis XVII, also allegedly known as Daniel Pesar. It almost makes you wonder on whose behalf the American Revolutionary War was really fought. But if the old world aristocracy already had effective control of the world before the late 1700s, why go through all of this trouble and deceive humanity into believing they are free? There are a number of reasons I suspect they had to proceed by gradualism instead of by smash and grab. But if you'll indulge me in some metaphysical speculation, I believe the main reason has to do with the nature of good and evil. I believe that our universe is governed by sacred spiritual laws which present-day humanity has forgotten. Among these laws are an endless tension between good and evil, in which good always conquers evil in the end. As Mel K said earlier, God gave us free will, therefore no one can take that from us. However, we can be tricked into giving up our free will. That is why Satan is known as the master of deception. This is why I believe the cabal went to all this work convincing humanity that we have sovereignty, only to put in place the turnkey, totalitarian infrastructure under which we would later relinquish that sovereignty due to manufactured crises. The Committee of 300 leadership is obsessed with eschatology, or bringing forth the apocalypse. They believe that their Antichrist will bring forth the end of days. What will be the apocalyptic event they plan to use to usher in the end of days? I certainly can't say. It could be nuclear war, the next pandemic, staged extraterrestrial invasion, or whatever Draco-reptilian hybrid monster that Huma Abedin and Alex Soros intend to consummate. Anyway, it doesn't matter if we believe it. We think it's insane. These batshit crazy psychopaths running the New World Order believe it's true. That's what matters. So let's bring the story forward to present day, and then I'll wrap up this discussion on the insidious ties between central banking, crisis initiation, organized crime, and war. Here's neocon Patrick Clausen of the Washington Institute for Near East Studies. This commentary is from a September 2012 panel in which this douchebag explains how the United States could use a smaller allied country to drag us into war with Iran.
Let me turn to my second point, what an attack might look like. Earlier this year, Scott Shane of the New York Times quoted me on their front page as saying, quote, "I often get asked when Israel might attack Iran. I say 2 years ago," end quote. And indeed, assassinating Iranian engineers and unleashing computer viruses are not friendly acts. And the United States has been up to its eyeballs in this game. The U.S. has acknowledged sabotaging equipment bound for Iran, facilitating defectors, engaging in intrusive intelligence collection. And furthermore, David Sanger of the New York Times tells a convincing story about Obama being deeply involved in a wide range of cyber attacks in Iran. These covert attacks continue. On September 17th, the Iranian Atomic Energy Organization Director Faridun Abbas Davani said that exactly 1 month earlier, the power lines to the Fordo enrichment site, quote, were cut using explosives, end quote. And he noted, quote, a power outage is a way of damaging centrifuge machines, end quote. If you think that explosion was an accident, please see me afterwards about the bridge I'm selling. Quiet intervention could have great advantages over a large-scale attack, including reducing the likelihood of international censure and Iranian retaliation. Additional covert steps and other unacknowledged military steps, which are now considered too risky, could well be worth considering should the talks falter. However, realistically, it will be a great challenge to identify shadow measures sufficiently robust that the Iranian nuclear program is materially slowed. Although we can hope that such acts would sow doubt in Iranian leaders' minds with regard to their development of nuclear weapons or otherwise induce them to compromise. Certainly, going small is the Israeli way of war. For 50 years now, whenever Israel has gone after another country's unconventional weapons, its method every time has been to go as small and quiet an attack as possible. Whether it was targeting German missile engineers in Egypt in the early 1960s, or striking the Syrian reactor in 2007, as David has written about in The New Yorker, Israel goes as small as it can. I have no idea what that'll mean for Iran, but I strongly suspect Israel will try once again to go small. I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall we had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. I would just like to suggest that one can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition. Of, it's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. we could get nastier at that.
Clausen's think tank, the Washington Institute for Near East Studies, was established in 1985 by AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. So when he says it would be best if somebody else started the war to drag the US into it, he's clearly referring to Israel. You know, America's greatest ally. With friends like these, who needs enemies? Again, this douchebag is speaking in September of 2012, less than 1.5 months before Barack Hussein Obama Jr. was reelected to his second term. By this time, Hussein's national security apparatus had successfully instigated Arab Spring revolutions in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, and Bahrain. 2 weeks earlier, on September 11, 2012, the State Department's Tech Camp had launched in Kiev, a practical means for training the digital insurrectionists who would play an instrumental role in Ukraine's Maidan Revolution the following winter. The Maidan Revolution would culminate in the Maidan Massacre, a suspected false flag event that left over 100 Ukrainian protesters and policemen dead, President Viktor Yanukovych expelled from power, and the control of Ukraine's government firmly in the hand of neo-Nazi factions who had caused the violent overthrow. The CIA-USAID instigated coup would lead directly to the Crimean referendum to join Russia, outbreak of civil war in the Donbass, and ultimately Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This conflict would exacerbate into a global one, with American-Russian tensions that would leave the planet on the brink of nuclear war. The Maidan massacre took place on February 20th, 2014, the day before Yanukovych's expulsion. It started when shooting began from the conservatory in Hotel Ukraine on Euromaidan Square, Kiev. The slaughter left 23 Ukrainian police officers and 100 civilians dead. These fallen Ukrainians have become known as the Heavenly Hundred. While most media outlets outside of Russia blamed the killings on the Berkut, the Ukrainian police, the formal investigations have been unsuccessful in identifying who the snipers were or who was responsible for the outbreak of violence. In time, the truth about the massacre will be brought to light. In the meantime, as someone who's spent more time than your average bear investigating this false flag, I sure wonder what role Joe Biden, Victoria Nuland, Jeffrey Piat, Mikhail Saakashvili, Mamuka Mamulashvili, Andriy Parubi, Sergei Pashinsky, George Bezhitashvili, Cesar Bajaladze, Zarab Inashvili, and Brian Boyinger had to play in this slaughter. By the launch of Kiev's tech camp in September 2012, President Barack Hussein Obama Jr., aka the Drone King, aka Barry Soetoro, aka Renegade, aka Hot Dog Boy, had significantly expanded the US's military involvement in the Middle East. Obama-Biden inherited the two terror wars in Afghanistan and Iraq from the W. Bush Cheney administration. He also entangled America's military in the 2011 intervention in Libya. This was done without congressional approval and resulted in the brutal murder of Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi's overthrow left Libya as a failed state controlled by Islamicist terrorists and led to the deaths of 4 American diplomats and warfighters in Benghazi on September 11, 2012. The same day Hillary Clinton's State Department launched their tech camps in Kiev. Despite his campaign promises of hope and change, Hot Dog Boy authorized 542 drone strikes during his presidency, killing an estimated 3,797 people, including 324 civilians. A total of 563 strikes, largely by drones, targeted Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen during Obama's 2 terms, compared to 57 strikes under Bush. The campaign extended far beyond drone strikes alone. In total, the Obama administration dropped 26,171 bombs across 7 countries: Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and Pakistan. Barry Soetoro's reign as president included a massive expansion of the War of Terror, and none of it was covered critically by the media at the time. Therefore, it's worth revisiting events of geopolitical significance leading into the 2012 presidential election. You may remember that on May 2nd, 2011, SEAL Team 6 infiltrated the compound of Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, Pakistan. During the raid, Osama bin Laden was killed by Rob O'Neill, or someone who looked just like him was killed by Rob O'Neill. If it was someone who looked just like him, say, a body double, what really happened?
There are all these theories about bin Laden, who he was really working for. Was he actually behind 9/11? Was that really him who you shot? Do people ever say that to you?
Yeah, I had someone tell me it was a body double that I shot, and my response is, well, I killed the guy that was in bed with bin Laden's wife, so either way, he had it coming. That dude.
O'Neill goes on to say it was 100% bin Laden who he shot. But what if he just added that last part out of necessity for his personal safety? Earlier, I mentioned how former Congressman Curt Weldon alleges that Osama bin Laden was never in Afghanistan.
Then I find out my intel team, those 20 people that were feeding me raw data, give me data within months after 9/11 that bin Laden's been sighted in a town called Ladiz. I have no idea where Ladiz is. So I go up Pennsylvania Avenue to a bookstore and buy a map. I just gave you the map here today, Tucker. You can show it. And I found Ladiz. It's not in Afghanistan. It's not in Pakistan. It's in Iran, in an area called Baluchistan. So I go to the next classified briefing for the full committee. Now I'm the vice chairman of the full committee. There are 60 members. I'm the acting chairman at this time. So I said to the CIA, I have information that bin Laden's in Ladiz. This is their response to me. Mr. Chairman, we've heard similar reports. We can either confirm or deny them. I was in shock. We're sending kids to die in Afghanistan, and we can't confirm or deny whether or not bin Laden's in Ladiz? 3 months go by. I'm still supporting the president. My intel team comes back to me and say, Curt, he's being treated at a military hospital outside of Tehran. I go back to the classified briefing and I ask the question in front of the full committee. And the answer from the CIA is, Mr. Chairman, we've heard similar reports. We can either confirm or deny that bin Laden is being treated at a military hospital outside of Tehran while we're sending kids to die in Afghanistan. I said, this is outrageous. And then, Tucker, I get a call from Jack Murtha, the most respected Democrat in the House, former Marine, who I work with closely. And he says to me, I want you to meet with Ron Klink, Democrat from Pittsburgh. And Ron Klink's still alive. He'll verify this, Tucker. Jack's dead, but Ron's alive. He said, Jack has a person who used to work for the agency that has information about Iran. And you investigate this kind of stuff, Curt. Will you meet with him? I said, sure. Ron Klink comes to my office and brings this very tall man who's a former person from the Swedish area, but he's a U.S. citizen. And I said, how can I help you? You know, Congressman Murtha asked me to help. Ron Klink wants me to help. He said, Congressman, I want you to help me get into Iran. I said, why do you want to go to Iran? He said, that's where bin Laden is. I said, why would you tell me that bin Laden's in Iran? He said, I was a knock for the agency. Do you know what a knock is?
Yeah, non-official cover.
That's right. He said, I was a knock for the agency, and I worked that area. And my friends are seeing bin Laden in Iran. If you help me get to Tehran, I'll leave my identity there. I'll get a piece of him, dead or alive, and I'll bring it back. At the time, there was a $25 million reward for bin Laden. I said, I can't help you right now because I'm in a battle over this follow-up to 9/11. Then I get another call, Tucker, from the Interior Department, totally separate. They want to bring in their top bird man, their bird expert. I didn't think that was unusual because I was the Republican on the Migratory Bird Commission. The Migratory Bird Commission.
No, there was a migratory.
It oversees all the flyways for all the refuges up and down the coast. I was the Republican.
Duck hunters like me, thank you, by the way.
John Dingell was a Democrat.
Of course, I've duck hunted with him, yeah.
2 senators and 3 cabinet members. So I figured they want to talk about birds. I'm on the Bird Commission. I'll meet with them. So this Interior Department bird expert brings in a U.S. citizen from Maine who's a Sikh, but he's a U.S. citizen, very wealthy family. And he's got 2 falcons on his shoulders, $1 million birds with the blinders on, beautiful, into my office. I said, good boy, they're gorgeous. How can I help you? He said, well, Congressman, I've devoted my life to falcons. He said, I helped write the UN protection treaties on falconry. He said, I trained all the children of the royal families in the sport of falconry.
Yes.
Because that's their sport. He said, they all know me, they all trust me. They
in
all
the
like
Arab
me.
world, it's huge.
Yes.
Yes.
He said, so, and I want to help the country, and there's a reward for bin Laden. I said, yeah, I know that. He said, I want you to help me go to Iran. I said, why do you want to go to Iran? Now, he knows nothing about anything else I'm doing. My falconers are seeing bin Laden's birds flying in Iran. You help me go to Iran, they'll accept me there because they know me. I'll tag his birds, and I'll take the U.S. to exactly where he is. That's four full source identities that bin Laden was exactly where my intel people said he was.
Weldon mentions a whistleblower and falconer whose name is Alan Harrow Perot. Perot's story, which we'll return to shortly, is documented in the 2010 documentary Feathered Cocaine. If bin Laden had been in Iran the entire time, is it possible the Obama administration got played? Could the Iranian National Guard have moved Osama bin Laden to Abbottabad only to swap him out with a body double and use that information to hold Obama hostage? Did you know that 12 hours after the Abbottabad raid, Osama bin Laden's body was shrouded in a white sheet, placed in a weighted bag, and dumped into the Arabian Sea? The Obama administration claimed this was done to follow traditional procedures for Islamic burial, which requires the dead to be buried as soon as possible. The military further claimed this was done to prevent bin Laden's gravesite from becoming a shrine or rallying point for followers. Nothing suspicious here, right? 3 months after bin Laden's death and the strange disposal of his body, 30 American troops died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. On August 6, 2011, a U.S. Army Chinook helicopter, call sign Extortion 17, was shot down. Extortion 17 was sent into the Tangi Valley of Afghanistan. Once they arrived, the helicopter was ambushed by 2 fighters, almost as if they were in on it, shooting it down with rocket-propelled grenade launchers. Everyone on board died within a fraction of a second: 30 Americans, 8 Afghans, and 1 American military working dog. Coincidentally, nearly 24 of those troops had been part of the SEAL Team 6 unit that killed Osama bin Laden. Dead men don't talk. Here are some of the other strange circumstances around the Extortion 17 shootdown, as explained by Mary Strange, the stepmother of Michael Strange, who was killed on board. Quote, "There have been so many inconsistencies in the reports and stories for this to be a lucky shot, so please do not insult us with an outrageous and offensive excuse as that. Let's begin with General Jeffrey Colt's statement in his summary of what happened. He states that the CH-47D Air Mission Commander and his task force commander determined this mission to be a high-risk mission due to the experience of one non-pilot crew chief, and because of this high risk, the mission had to be approved by the higher headquarters commander for Special Operations Task Force and the supporting aviation brigadier commander. Who are these incompetent individuals? Why would they okay all 31 men on one CH-47 if before leaving the forward operating base, it was determined to already be a high-risk mission? Then, they gave no escorts for Extortion 17 on an already high-risk mission into a hot landing zone, HLZ. Standard operating procedures were not followed because they should have had an escort, a C-130 gunship or an AH-64 Apache, upon leaving the FOB. Our men had none. General Colt states the Ranger-led assault force was supported by 2 CH-47D Chinook Helos and 2 AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, along with an AC-130 gunship and a relatively robust team of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance (ISR) aircraft. Then, to add insult to injury, the next line is as follows. The 2 CH-47Ds would airlift the assault force, totaling 47 personnel, into a landing zone approximately 1,200 meters from the suspected location of the Tangi Valley Taliban leader, Kara Tahrir, aka Objective Lefty Grove. So there were 47 Rangers and 31 Americans aboard Extortion 17. That equals 78 of our special operators to capture one Taliban leader? Why? Then, when the Rangers arrived at their target compound, overhead manned and unmanned aircraft observed several personnel departing the target area. The AH-64 Apache attack helicopters detected and positively identified suspected Taliban fighters armed with AK-47 rifles and RPG launchers walking single file approximately 400 meters northwest of the target compound. Throughout the execution of the mission, the overhead ISR aircraft continued to track the movement of suspected Taliban fighters. This group formed around 2 personnel who were observed moving northwest from the immediate vicinity of the target area before the Ranger-led assault had arrived. Did they know the Rangers were coming? Sure sounds like that to me. There were Taliban in the trees on motorcycles in the building approximately 2 kilometers from the original compound. They all knew this, but still allowed our boys to go in a hot landing zone, all 31 Americans on 1 helo. We were told the Rangers needed help because they were under attack. Then we come to find out, are you ready for this? The Rangers were never even in danger. Our boys did not have to be deployed that night as an IRF. So, why were they? The 7 Afghan commandos who were originally on Extortion 17 either got off and refused to get back on, or were switched out and 7 new Afghans got on. Who were they? Why were they never questioned? Who made these decisions? How come General Colt never asks these questions? Are the 7 that aborted Extortion 17 still being allowed to fly with our special operators? If so, why? In the investigation paperwork, Exhibit 89, Colt asks the Air Force Commander, AFC, what is the assessment of the Tangi Valley? AFC answers, over 100 Taliban plan to travel from the province to the Tangi Valley to shoot down the coalition force aircraft. They knew and did nothing to prevent this? Why, when our men requested pre-assault fire 2 to 3 times to clear the hot landing zone, they were denied? Who denied that request? The Occupational Coordination Group, or OCG, has the final say in every mission our Special Ops does, whether it is a go or if they don't like it, they can call the mission off. How the hell can we ever win a war when the enemy knows all our moves before we do them? Where are the black boxes? On October 12, 2011, General Colt, when my husband, Charles Strange, asked this question, Colt replies, a flash flood came and washed it away. We have looked into this and these boxes don't go away. In fact, they have beacons on them and can be found 20,000 feet underwater. So we ask again, where are the black boxes? What don't they want us to hear on those recordings? There were 3 eyes in the sky, but not one on Extortion 17. Why? General Colt asks about them and is told, we never did a mission like this, sir, referring to Colt. It made us feel very vulnerable. Our hands were tied from up above. How far up is up above? Who gave this command? 95 days prior, all eyes were on SEAL Team 6 from the Situation Room. My stepson, CTR-1 Michael Strange, was cremated. He did not need to be. Why were we told they were all burned beyond recognition? No identifiable remains and only 38 C-spines and skulls left. Lies, lies, and more lies. Why? We need help finding the truth. Why are the parents and loved ones of Extortion 17 being allowed to be treated this way? The men of Extortion 17 were men of courage, integrity, and honor, and not only did the families lose their loved ones, but this country lost 30 heroic defenders of freedom. Please help the families of Extortion 17 find some closure, and that can only begin with the truth. We deserve that much. The only time you have to lie is if you know what you're doing is wrong. End quote. Nothing suspicious about Extortion 17 either, so we better shut the fuck up and not ask any questions about it, right? If the public caught wind of any dirty negotiations with Iran and/or the fact that Osama bin Laden was not exactly dead, that sure would have put a damper on the hollow slogan of the Obama-Biden's 2012 campaign.
Osama bin Laden is dead and General Motors is alive.
The Obama administration and their allies in the media kept the truth hidden and ensured his successful re-election that November. You may remember that the crowning achievement of Barack's second term was the Iran deal. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, was implemented on January 16, 2016 to limit the Iranian nuclear program in return for sanctions relief and other provisions. Critics of the deal claimed the JCPOA provided our greatest enemy, Iran, with $150 billion worth of sanctions relief, funds that would likely be redirected into sponsoring terrorism and developing Iran's nuclear weapons capabilities. As part of the JCPOA, the United States also sent $1.7 billion in pallets of cash to Iran. Officially, this was for a decades-long legal dispute that was before an international tribunal in The Hague. The day after the JCPOA was implemented, Obama provided a press conference explaining the strengths of the deal.
Now settling a long-standing Iranian government claim against the United States government. Iran will be returned its own funds, including appropriate interest, but much less than the amount Iran sought. For the United States, this settlement could save us billions of dollars that could have been pursued by Iran, so there was no benefit to the United States in dragging this out.
As questions grew over the subsequent months regarding the cash payout to Iran, Hussein was forced to return to the podium and defend this decision.
We announced these payments in January, many months ago. There wasn't a secret. We announced them to all of you. Josh did a briefing on them. This wasn't some nefarious deal. And at the time, we explained that Iran had pressed a claim before an international tribunal about them recovering money of theirs that we had frozen, that as a consequence of its working its way through the international tribunal, it was the assessment of our lawyers that we were now at a point where there was significant litigation risk and we could end up costing ourselves billions of dollars. It was their advice and suggestion that we settle. And that's what these payments represent. And it wasn't a secret. We were completely open with everybody about it, and it's interesting to me how suddenly this became a story again.
Methinks thou dost protest too much, Hussein. Here's a news clip that summarizes exactly why the details of the Iran deal simply don't pass the smell test.
Obama left office, he sent $1.7 billion in cash to Iran. The money was delivered in actual cash, stacked on pallets and flown into the country. It happened in January 2016 when Obama authorized the transfer of the money to the nation known for sponsoring terrorism. The funds were allegedly part of a long-standing financial obligation stemming from a pre-1979 agreement. Prior to the Iranian Revolution, the United States had committed to supplying Iran with military equipment. However, following the revolution, the transaction was abandoned, leaving Iran to claim reimbursement for the $400 million initially paid. With the accrued interest, this amount spiked to $1.7 billion. The Obama administration decided to resolve the debt. On January 17th of 2016, an aircraft arrived in Iran carrying $400 million in cash loaded onto pallets. The remaining balance of the $1.7 billion was delivered in subsequent shipments. Now, as Israel continues its attacks on Iranian nuclear and military sites, President Donald Trump is deciding how involved the United States will become in this war. Many pointing straight back to Obama as the reason Iran had the funding to continue paying for terror and start building up their nuclear programs.
Is it possible that the Osama bin Laden raid and dumping of his body, the shootdown of Extortion 17, the JCPOA agreement, and the $1.7 billion in cash sent to Iran are all related? Could the Iranian regime have secretly extorted the Obama administration in both blood, the deaths of SEAL Team 6, and in treasure, the cash and sanctions relief? If this is all true, how has this evidence surfaced? Where did the weapons come from that shot down Extortion 17? Could they have been funneled through Syria as part of the neocons' dirty war to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? A goal that they failed at during President Obama's tenure, but which they snuck in at the tail end of Biden's? And if the US was sending weapons to Assad's opponents, wouldn't that mean we were sending weapons to ISIS? Even the corrupt US Congress couldn't possibly have approved sending weapons to ISIS in Syria. Therefore, they would have had to first move these weapons through an intermediary. The type of mercenary arms dealer one might find in, say, Benghazi, Libya? Hey, I wonder if weapons smuggling had anything to do with why Ambassador Chris Stevens was in Benghazi the night of September 11th, 2012. The night Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, and Glenn Doherty lost their lives after Secretary of State Hillary Clinton may or may not have issued a stand-down order. These 4 Americans were killed by Ansar al-Sharia terrorists, also known as al-Qaeda's Libyan faction. These terrorists are the same ones the Obama-Clinton State Department had supported during the brutal overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi the year prior, an event which has left Libya effectively as a failed state in perpetual civil war. What evidence do we have of the Obama, Biden, Clinton, Kerry State Department's funding and arming of terrorists? Their emails, for one. Here's journalist John Pilger interviewing Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, recorded just before the 2016 presidential election.
What's the significance of the FBI's intervention in this last week of the US election campaign in the case against Hillary Clinton?
If you look at the history of the FBI, it has become effectively America's political police. And the FBI demonstrated with taking down the former head of the CIA over classified information given to his mistress. Almost no one was untouchable. The FBI is always trying to demonstrate that. No one can resist us. But Hillary Clinton very conspicuously resisted the FBI's investigation. So there's anger within the FBI because it made the FBI look weak. Well, we've published quite a number of different sets of emails. So about 33,000 of Clinton's emails while she was Secretary of State. They come from a batch of just over 60,000 emails. In that 60,000 emails, Clinton has kept about half, 30,000, to herself, and we've published about half. And then there's the Podesta emails we've been publishing. Podesta is Hillary Clinton's primary campaign manager. So there's a thread that runs through all these emails. There is quite a lot of pay for play, as they call it, giving access in exchange for money for many different states, individuals and corporations, combined with the cover-up of the Hillary Clinton emails while she was Secretary of State, has led to an environment where the pressure on the FBI increases.
I mean, the Clinton campaign has said that Russia's behind all of this. It says that Russia has manipulated the campaign and is the source for WikiLeaks and its emails.
The Clinton camp has been able to project a kind of neo-McCarthyist hysteria that Russia is responsible for everything. Hillary Clinton stated multiple times, falsely, that 17 US intelligence agencies had assessed that Russia was the source of our publications. Okay, that's false. We can say that the Russian government is not the source, yes. WikiLeaks has been publishing for 10 years. In that 10 years, we've published 10 million documents, several thousand individual publications, several thousand different sources. And we have never got it wrong.
All the emails that give evidence of access for money and how Hillary Clinton herself benefited from this and how she is benefiting politically are quite extraordinary. I'm thinking of where the Qatari representative was given 5 minutes with Bill Clinton for $1 million check, and many other examples. Can you
12 million for Morocco.
12 million for Morocco.
Hillary Clinton to attend.
In terms of the foreign policy of the United States, that's where, for me anyway, where the emails are most revealing, where they show the direct connection between Hillary Clinton and the foundation of jihadism, of ISIL in the Middle East. Can you talk something about that? How the emails demonstrate this connection between those who are meant to be fighting the jihadists, ISIL, are actually those who have helped create it.
There's an early 2014 email from Hillary Clinton, so not so long after she left Secretary of State, to her campaign manager, John Podesta. That email, it states that ISIS is funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Now, this is I think this is the most significant email in the whole collection. And perhaps because Saudi and Qatari money is spread all over the place, including into many media institutions. All serious analysts know, even the US government has mentioned or agreed with that some Saudi figures have been supporting ISIS, funding ISIS. But the dodge has always been that's it's just some rogue princes using their cut of the oil money to do whatever they like, but actually the government disapproves. But that email says that no, it is the governments of Saudi and the government and Qatar that have been funding ISIS.
The Saudis, the Qataris, the Moroccans, the Bahrainis, particularly the Saudis and the Qataris, are giving all this money to the Clinton Foundation, while Hillary Clinton is Secretary of State and the State Department is approving massive arms sales, particularly to Saudi Arabia.
Under Hillary Clinton, and our Clinton emails reveal significant discussion about it, the largest ever arms deal in the world was made with Saudi Arabia, more than $80 billion. In fact, during her tenure as Secretary of State, total arms exports from the United States in terms of the dollar value doubled.
And of course, the consequence of that is that this notorious terrorist jihadist group called ISIL or ISIS is created largely with money from the very people who are giving money to the Clinton Foundation.
Yes.
That's extraordinary.
Look, Hillary Clinton's just a person. I actually feel quite sorry for Hillary Clinton as a person because I see someone who is eaten alive by their ambitions, tormented, literally to the point where they become sick. They faint as a result of going on with their ambitions. But she represents a whole network of people and a network of relationships also with particular states. The question is, how does Hillary Clinton fit in this broader network? Well, she's a centralizing cog, so that you've got a lot of different gears in operation from the big banks like Goldman Sachs and major elements of Wall Street and intelligence and people in the State Department and the Saudis and so on. She's the, if you like, the centralizer that interconnects all these different cogs. She's a smooth central representation of all that. And all that is more or less what is in power now in the United States. It's what we call the establishment or the DC consensus and its influences. In fact, one of the more significant Podesta emails that we released was about how the Obama cabinet was formed. And half of the Obama cabinet was basically nominated by a representative from Citibank.
Well,
it's quite amazing.
Didn't Citibank supply a list which turned out to be mostly the Obama cabinet?
Yes.
So Wall Street decides the cabinet of the President of the United States.
But if you were following the Obama campaign back then closely, you could see it had become very close to banking interests. It wasn't so close to oil interests, but it was very close to banking interests.
Yeah.
So I think you can't properly understand Hillary Clinton's foreign policy without understanding Saudi Arabia. The connections with Saudi Arabia are so intimate.
Why was she so demonstrably enthusiastic about the destruction of Libya? Can you talk a little about just what the emails have told you about what happened there? Because Libya is such a source for so much of the mayhem now in Syria, the ISIL, jihadism, and so on. And it was almost Hillary Clinton's invasion. What do the emails tell us about that?
Libya, more than anyone else's war, was Hillary Clinton's war. Barack Obama initially opposed it. Who was the person who was championing it? Hillary Clinton. That's documented throughout her emails. She put her favoured agent, in effect, Sidney Blumenthal, onto that. There's more than 1,700 emails out of the 33,000 Hillary Clinton emails we published just about Libya. It's not about that Libya has cheap oil. She perceived the removal of Gaddafi and the overthrow of the Libyan state, something that she would use to run in the general election for president. So late 2011, there's an internal document called the Libya TikTok that is produced for Hillary Clinton. And it's a chronological description of how Hillary Clinton was the central figure in the destruction of the Libyan state. As a result, there was around 40,000 deaths within Libya. Jihadists moved in, ISIS moved in. That led to the European refugee and migrant crisis, because not only did you have people fleeing Libya, people then fleeing Syria, destabilization of other African countries as a result of arms flows. The Libyan state itself was no longer able to control movement of people through it. So the Libya faces onto the Mediterranean. And so it had been effectively the cork in the bottle of Africa. So all problems, economic problems, civil war in Africa, previously people fleeing those problems didn't end up in Europe because Libya policed the Mediterranean. And that was said explicitly at the time, back in early 2011 by Gaddafi. What do these Europeans think that they're doing, trying to bomb and destroy the Libyan state? There's going to be floods of migrants out of Africa and jihadists into Europe, and that is exactly what happened.
Those are some heavy truths Assange exposed with the release of Hillary Clinton's and John Podesta's emails. And while I suspect Julian Assange will go down in history as one of the bravest, most dedicated defenders of truth the world has ever seen, he's certainly not the only one. Another would be Charles Woods, the father of SEAL Team 6 veteran Tyrone Woods, who perished in the Benghazi terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2012. Remember how I mentioned Hillary Clinton may or may not have issued a stand-down order that night, leaving all the Americans in Benghazi to die? Charles Woods never stopped asking why. Those questions eventually led Woods to Alan Harrow Perot, the Sikh falconer we discussed earlier. When the two of them came together with Nick No less than 1 month before the 2020 election, the secrets they revealed were explosive.
Hey, good morning, Alan. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Nick, and great to be here.
Please introduce yourself to everybody. Your full name.
My name's Alan Perot. I was a falconer for Arab political leaders for 20 years, and then I spent another 10 years in former Soviet territories doing conservation work and catching falcon smugglers.
Excellent. So we crossed paths about a year ago, or no, about 8 months ago, and I have always been searching for the reasons as to why they wanted everyone to die in Benghazi. And boy, do you have some really good information that explains everything. And we appreciate that you're taking the time to share it with us, everyone. So,
thank you. Well, I have to say that our military are so well trained, their work is compartmentalized. And the only people that understand the full story are the people at the top. And they have made some very bad decisions for this country and for the former Navy SEAL Ty Woods and his brethren who perished unnecessarily at the hands of Hillary Clinton. And in the large picture, this involves Joe Biden and John Brennan.
So could you explain the context of how did this all start?
Well, the gestation, the beginning was in the 70s during the Church Commission, when an alternate CIA was created called the Safari Club. And the Safari Club was financed by overseas allies. It was outsourced to foreign banks. I have 2 banks and bank accounts that were used by the Safari Club, and the individuals with checks paid out by them. Osama bin Laden was one of the recipients of funding from this alternate CIA that was subverting the oversight control of the successor to the Church Commission, and that is the Senate Intelligence Committee. 1 week before bin Laden was killed, I was called down to the Senate Intelligence Committee to give statements and evidence. And I have quite a few tape recordings and of senior members who were aware of bin Laden's house arrest in Iran for 10 years following Tora Bora. This was arranged by John Brennan. This is why Gary Bernson was not allowed to kill Osama bin Laden in Tora Bora when he was only a few hundred yards away, because the plans had been made and set in stone by John Brennan to extradite bin Laden from Tora Bora to Iran, where he remained under house arrest for 10 years with more than 100 al-Qaeda leaders and their families.
So what you're saying is that there was no need for us to invade Afghanistan under the pretext of getting al-Qaeda if the U.S. government knew and was actually protecting his life in Iran. Is that correct?
Well, I have to say it was rogue elements of the U.S. government controlled by John Brennan, Richard Clark, Vice President Biden, quite a few people. There's a long list of people. They started with good intentions. The Safari Club was begun to fight the expansion of the USSR, but it turned into a very distorted operation over the years. And Osama bin Laden was the figurehead manifestation of this alternate CIA. And so they had to protect him in their bad judgment. And you see, one lie leads to another. Our parents always taught us this. And so when my team, we planned a program to go in and get bin Laden in Iran. We were going to catch him when he was falconry hunting, because I spent 20 years living with Arab political leaders, training their falcons and going out in these camps, hunting with them. And then I noticed there were terrorists coming into these camps, and the Royal Falconry camps are Al-Qaeda's boardroom. This is where these bad guys come. There are no passport or border controls. And so we were going to go in and get bin Laden, but unfortunately, within minutes of ascending to the office of the CIA director, Leon Panetta's first act in office was to cancel the Rigor program, RIGOR, a covert CIA program to catch and kill Osama bin Laden in Iran. This was 6 months after Barack Obama was sworn in as president, and Leon Panetta threw a tantrum and canceled Rigor. This was reported by Goldman and Apuzzo, and slightly mischaracterized in the press as targeting al-Qaeda leaders all over the world, but it was focused only on Iran and bin Laden. And so when we were first ignored and then obstructed and then threatened by 8 CIA officials and warned off going into Iran to get bin Laden. We had passports, visas, everything was ready. The Revolutionary Guards were going to be our bodyguards while we were out doing bona fide scientific research as a cover for catching bin Laden alive for delivery to a tri-state area. When we were shut down by Leon Panetta and others, I began negotiating directly with Iran 6 scenario analyses for the transfer of bin Laden alive and well to coalition forces, and to have him put in a neutral zone. And Iran is on tape agreeing to this. It was all done. It took 3 years to develop this. I had meetings in the Iranian mission at the United Nations. Ambassador Mohammed Kazai organized everything. Bakhsarai was the handler. There were several handlers. Everything was ready. And then I went to Governor Bill Richardson, New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, on December 2nd and 3rd of 2010. He agreed to be the U.S. envoy to receive bin Laden for a transfer to coalition custody. And it turned out that bin Laden had already been moved to Abbottabad, Pakistan in August of 2010. And so...
Why was he transferred there?
He was transferred there because in the 6 scenario analyses that I discussed with Iran, by harboring Osama bin Laden and 100 al-Qaeda leaders, this represents an act of war against the United States. Their nuclear facilities could be bombed and their economy obliterated. So the time moves backwards instead of forwards. And the Iranians didn't want to risk exposing their complicity with John Brennan and others to harbor. You see, John Brennan and Clinton and Biden outsourced the imprisonment of al-Qaeda leaders to Iran. We think of outsourcing as being a commercial activity. They outsourced our military responsibilities to an untrustworthy adversary, Iran. And they did that to save Iran from retaliation for harboring terrorists. And so Iran had no choice in their estimation but to accept the offer of Clinton in lieu of my offer, which was transferred to a neutral zone, because that would have endangered their economy and their nuclear program.
And
so
Clinton, forgive me, I want to ask you about this. So Clinton actually knew about this, right? She knew that they were willing to just hand him over to us.
Tapes, registered letters, everything to Clinton.
So she knew that they were ready, Iran was ready to give us bin Laden with no real struggle. And
absolutely.
She decided to have him move to Pakistan for a trophy kill.
They moved him to Abbottabad in August of 2010. And that's our first overhead viewings of bin Laden walking in the garden. Everybody said he was crippled, but he walked down 3 flights of stairs to walk in a garden to advertise his presence, okay? It was an advertisement. Then the gas line was put on the 3rd floor of the Abbottabad complex in August because his wives had to stay sequestered away from the other men. They had to cook in private without the purdah veil. And other things. One of bin Laden's sons said his father was strangely resigned to dying in Abbottabad. So he was held there in a gilded cage, awaiting his trophy kill. He was moved from Mashhad, Iran, into Abbottabad airport, and then moved to this prison complex, the Abbottabad compound. It was not there to protect him. It was there to keep him there, awaiting his appointment with destiny. But the Iranians turned it into a fateful result because they pulled bin Laden out at the last minute, at the 11th hour, after an Iranian agent, a double agent, a Pakistan ISI officer who worked for Iran covertly, provided the DNA evidence to the CIA station chief. Finally, they were convinced it was bin Laden in Abbottabad. and they sent in SEAL Team 6. And Musharraf said he didn't know about the SEAL Team 6 coming in, but they had to let down the radar long enough for the helicopters to come in. And they only told Obama about the SEAL Team 6 kill mission after the radar was put back up and SEAL Team 6 could not go back into Afghanistan. It was then a one-way trip that could not be canceled. You see, we have a witness who witnessed Hillary and Panetta threatening Obama that if he didn't greenlight the bin Laden kill mission, they would expose him in the press and he would never survive politically. And he actually was reluctant to authorize the kill mission. That's why they pulled him off the golf course only after the mission could not be canceled. And so the agent provocateurs, the engineers of all of this were John Brennan, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden. And when they went in there, trusting the Iranians had bin Laden there waiting for them, SEAL Team 6, your son.
He was retired at that time. Actually.
Yes, but the SEAL Team 6, they killed Osama bin Laden's double.
How do we know that?
One of the wives went running towards them before he shot him and said, "Don't shoot, he's a double." I don't know the language she used. And then if you read Cy Hirsch's book, he explains that they threw the body parts over the Hindu Kush mountains. They didn't even save them like they saved the sons of Saddam Hussein in a refrigerated tent, well preserved and with makeup, just to prove that the Wicked Witch was dead. They saved the sons of Saddam Hussein, but they did not save the corpse of Osama bin Laden because it was his double, and it could not handle the scrutiny of DNA testing on the strip.
Okay, so the SEAL team, they knew that it was thrown out of the helicopter.
They learned that it was not bin Laden, and so they threw the body parts over the Hindu Kush mountains. And John Brennan said that the people on the ship were told to keep quiet about the burial at sea, but they all say that they never were told to keep quiet because there was no burial at sea. John Brennan took the lead and made the fake media announcements. He lied to the press when he explained this Muslim burial at sea. It's actually haram. It's forbidden to bury a Muslim at sea unless the body's going to endanger the lives of the crew with disease risk. You know, you can't, because you see in the ocean, the feet, it'll rotate around and the feet will face Mecca. It's haram. You must bury on land with the face facing Mecca. So Brennan, who's a Muslim, you'd think he'd know not to lie about something so obvious. He said it was a Muslim burial at sea. Nonsense. And so this big lie that you see, Biden, Hillary, and Clinton worked this agreement with Iran. They trusted Iran to move bin Laden to Pakistan. He did. He was there. But then they trusted Iran to keep him there. They moved him out back to Iran. And then the communication from Iran to Obama was, hey, we got your neck in a noose. Give us all this money. $152 billion, $2 billion on an airplane pallet was paid out for the secrets I wish to reveal now and to the president under the terms of misprision and treason. That is to say, this is a secret. These are secrets worth $152 billion paid by President Obama. And Vice President Biden paid with the blood of SEAL Team 6 when he had them killed.
So it's blackmail and extortion then.
Blackmail and extortion.
Now,
Iran commandeered.
You have the documents to
Yes.
this.
Yes.
Now,
Iran. Yes, sir.
Well, I was going to ask you, if you have those documents, are you willing to personally deliver those to President Trump if he were to provide the transportation and the guarantee of safety for you to do that?
Well, I'm not concerned about safety. There's always an invisible hand that protects us, and we're on the winning team. America's on the winning team.
Not one sparrow falls to the ground outside of God's will.
Yes. It would be my pleasure and my honor to bring this material to President Trump. There's a massive amount, terabytes, documents, video, audio. It needs to go to the president.
I will do everything that I can to get this video in his hands.
It's my only wish.
Alan, I've got a question for you. So that means that SEAL Team 6 was shot down on purpose after the trophy killed to ensure that no dead man can tell no tales.
You were correct. So that President Obama paid bribery of $152 million. Vice President Biden paid with the blood of SEAL Team 6. He spent their blood like currency.
Well, I've got to share something with you. Actually, Charles does. Charles, tell him about the Army Ranger that you talked to that was in the city where they were shot down.
Okay. We lived in Hawaii, and for about a month afterwards, I was in shock. And my wife and I, we went walking on the beach. And in the back of my vehicle, I have a bumper sticker about Ty. And this gentleman came up to me, and he was an Army Ranger that had been injured and he was recuperating in Hawaii. And he said, "How do you know Chief Petty Officer Woods?" And I said, "Well, I'm his dad." And he says, "Well, I worked with your son." And we became very close. It was part of my healing process, actually, getting to know him. He started coming to our church. His girlfriend started surfing with my daughters, and they ended up getting married. And one of the things that he told me, he says, "I was on the Ranger team that was in that village where SEAL Team 6 was killed." The story was by the Biden-Obama administration that there was this team that was under attack in this village. We're going to die if you don't get someone here really quick. And so they loaded SEAL Team 6 on this slow, vintage Huey helicopter the size of a school bus and slowly got them to the village. Now, they did not request help. They'd been in that village numerous times before. In fact, if someone came, it would actually endanger them. The story was not true. And then usually when a helicopter comes in, it goes zoom right down to the ground, opens up, all the troops go out in seconds, and then boom, the helicopter goes straight up. Well, this was a sitting target, okay, the size of a school bus. It hovered in the air over that village, just waiting to be shot down. And the people hot roped. I'd never heard the word hot rope before. That means they each individually lowers down while it was a sitting target. And then apparently it was shot down by one of those weapons that Hillary Clinton illegally sent to Benghazi to give to a terrorist organization the U.S. government used to get rid of our ally who was fighting terrorism. That's Gaddafi.
One of the
and then that weapon ended up over in Afghanistan.
They were Stinger missiles. Thousands upon thousands of them went missing. And Mark Turi was told that he had a small arms covert weapons program going. So that way none of that was ever given to someone, because they could shoot down jetliners just flying by if they wanted to. A child could do it, and a 12-year-old could do it. So these Stinger missiles went through Benghazi and then were given to the people who shot down SEAL Team 6. That was a setup. They were covering their tracks there. And then when they found the serial number on one of the missiles, it is traced back to the CIA from Qatar, from that weapons cache of Stinger missiles. That's why they had to then cover their tracks after people found out that the missiles were from Qatar, and then they could trace back where they came from Hillary through Benghazi. That's why Stevens was back there to recover those missiles and cover up the evidence. Well, that's at least what he was told. I assume that part of the plan for her was to eliminate everyone there at the Benghazi compound as well.
It's just so wicked. It's hard. It's just so unimaginably evil what these people do.
Dead men don't talk.
Well,
Alan,
we'll talk. We will talk.
You have some good news coming up here in the next week and a half.
Yes, sir.
It's going to be released, audio tapes, documents.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to hearing about it and seeing everybody connect the dots, because it's pretty plain to see the people involved, and it's all connected to another crime spree. And that's another story, though.
Well, let's just remember that heavy price has been paid for the secrets we are uncovering. And there are millions of people who want to see the truth. And we're going to deliver.
Well, America is a democracy, and for a democracy to work, the people that vote need to know what the truth is. And that is why we have 3 weeks for the people of the United States to get to know the truth. I hope that the media covers this, including the fake media, because the truth has to come out for our democracy to work properly so people can vote intelligently.
Totally agree. I agree.
All right, Alan, we appreciate your time today. I'm sure this is just the beginning, and we look forward to hearing and seeing what you're going to show to everyone in the future.
It's the beginning, but it's also the beginning of the end for the bad guys.
Woo-hoo. What if Alan Perot was absolutely right? That this is the beginning of the end for the bad guys? Or, more precisely, what if the beginning of the end started over a decade ago? Could there be another way to interpret recent geopolitical events rather than the way they've been presented by the mainstream media? Do you remember back in 2016 when Julian Assange and WikiLeaks released the Democrat National Committee's emails, how the DNC then hired CrowdStrike to report that Russia had hacked those emails? Where was the FBI on that investigation? And are you aware that the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, or VIPs, concluded that the DNC data was copied onto a storage device at a speed that far exceeds the internet capability for a remote hack, indicating the emails must have been leaked, not hacked, downloaded locally to an external hard drive by someone with physical access. Speaking of someone with local physical access, could the leaker have been Seth Rich, a DNC staffer from Omaha and a Bernie Sanders supporter? A man who was killed in a botched robbery on July 10, 2016 in Washington, D.C., where the robbers botched the stealing part and left Seth's phone, wallet, watch, and gold necklace on his person. Did you know that some of the public think this was a political assassination to retaliate against Rich for leaking the emails, to distract the public from the significance of their content, and to blame the leaks on Russia? Laying additional groundwork for the Russiagate hoax levied against Donald Trump, and furthering the neocon agenda to provoke Russia into hot war against NATO using Ukraine as a proxy? Did you know that some people have gone even further down the Seth Rich conspiracy theory? For example, did you know that some have interpreted Q Drop 436 as suggesting Seth Rich was murdered by 2 MS-13 gang members, who were then murdered the next day? Specifically, Rafael Aguilar and Carmelo Marmolejo Calixto, who were murdered in Socastee, South Carolina the day after Rich's killing. Did you know that Q Drop 436 indicates the entire operation was orchestrated by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the disgraced former head of the DNC, who resigned in shame after the emails were released? Real bonkers, right? Now, this was all I had planned to say about Q Drop 436 for this episode. But then, a few weeks before publication, CIA Director John Ratcliffe and Attorney General Pam Bondi declassified a bombshell, the appendix of Special Counsel John Durham's report on the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Crossfire Hurricane drove the multi-years-long Russiagate hoax to destroy Trump 45's presidency. The smoking gun evidence revealed what honest journalists have known for nearly a decade: that Russiagate was a coup created by the Clinton campaign, concocted by Hillary's advisor, Julianne Smith, supported by the Obama administration, peddled by the intelligence agencies, and repeated without question by the legacy Mockingbird media. This classified annex revealed that between 2014 and 2016, Russian intelligence services had hacked and gained access to numerous U.S. entities, including George Soros's Open Society foundations. These emails were provided to the FBI, including 2 from Soros's minion, Leonardo Bernardo, the regional director for Eurasia at Soros's Open Society foundations. The source notified the FBI of Hillary Clinton's plans to vilify Moscow and to discredit Putin and Trump. The smoking gun email from Bernardo was sent on July 27, 2016, 4 days before the official opening of Crossfire Hurricane. The email begins, quote, "Hi, HRC approved Julia's idea about Trump and Russian hackers hampering U.S. elections. That should distract people from her own missing email, especially if the affair goes to the Olympic level. The point is making the Russian play a U.S. domestic issue. Say something like critical infrastructure threat for the election to feel menace." End quote. There's a specific sentence from this email I wanted to highlight. This should distract people from her own missing email, especially if the affair goes to the Olympic level. What did Bernardo mean by "if the affair goes to the Olympic level"? Is he using an analogy, saying the Russiagate scandal needed to be Olympic in size to distract from Hillary's missing emails, which were discovered on her illegal private email server as part of the Benghazi investigation, much of which she deleted in violation of her congressional subpoena? Was he saying the Russiagate hoax needed to be an affair the size of the Russian doping scandal, which resulted in the stripping of 51 medals from Russian Olympians? Or could the affair Bernardo was referring to have been the Hillary Benghazi email scandal server itself? And could the phrase Olympic level refer to something else entirely? You see, that term reminded me of something I had just read in John Coleman's book, Conspirators' Hierarchy, The Story of the Committee of 300, written in 1992. Quote, "This elite group also calls itself the Olympians. They truly believe they are equal in power to the legendary gods of Olympus, who have, like Lucifer their god, set themselves above our true God." End quote. With that in mind, is it possible Bernardo was saying it was critical they blow up the Russiagate scandal as a means to cover up the Clinton email server scandal, and that this was done out of concern that Hillary's deleted emails could implicate the highest levels of Committee of 300 leadership, the Olympic level? With that question in mind, let's revisit Q Drop 436 to see if Q indicates Olympic level involvement in the Benghazi to Russiagate crime-to-crime pipeline. The drop reads, 1 of 22, in brackets, DNC breach/dossier, in brackets, DNC, in brackets, SR, to, in brackets, WL, to Hussein, to DNI director, to clown director, to class 1 through 12, to Goog, to CrowdStrike, to DNC, to, in parentheses, SR 187, in parentheses, MS13 to 187, DWS DIR, to F-I/D-J assist, to insurance. The pyramid, to Hussein, to HRC, to LL, to JC, to AM, to PS, support, CS, NP, AS, class of 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, class 5, class 6, to Brit Intel, to HRC Camp Pay, to DNC Pay, to class 1 through 4 Pay, to Steel, to Podesta, to Holder Relay Spec in Russia, to class 1 through 9, to US Sen No Name, to US Sen Class 1, to US Sen Class 2, to JC, to LL, to Hussein, to, in brackets, FISA 2. Daily B to US Send No Name to News Shop to Buzz F to Public/Narrative. Stage Set Future Prevent/Removal Op. Ramif. U.S. Intel Legal Spy on Pres Candidate /Pres Elect /R Congress /R Sen /News Friendly /etc. Q. Now let's say that hypothetically, Q is a team of high-ranking military, intelligence, and Justice Department officials, less than 10, close to President Trump with Q-level security clearance. Could it then be possible to interpret Drop 436 roughly as follows? The timeline of the DNC breach began when they were leaked by Seth Rich via WikiLeaks. President Barack Hussein Obama Jr. then ordered the DNI director, James Clapper, the director of the CIA, or Clowns in Action, John Brennan, and 12 other individuals with classified identities who worked with Google. Google, then led by Eric Schmidt, brought in CrowdStrike to falsify the leak and blame it instead on a Russian hack. The Democratic National Committee ordered the assassination of Seth Rich by two MS-13 gang members, Rafael Aguilar and Carmelo Marmolejo Calixto, who were then themselves assassinated. This operation was directed by Debbie Wasserman Schultz with the assistance of the FBI and the Department of Justice. Now, insurance was needed to create an alternative explanation for how the emails got to WikiLeaks and to distract from the actual content of the emails. The triangle of families running the cabal, the Saudi royal family, the Rothschilds, and George Soros, ordered the creation of the Steele dossier, giving President Obama the go-ahead to coordinate with the Hillary Clinton campaign. The hoax was carried out by Attorney General Loretta Lynch, FBI Director James Comey, FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, and FBI Deputy Assistant Director of Counterintelligence Peter Strzok, who were instructed to start spying on Donald Trump and to manufacture dirt on him. This high treason was supported by Senators Chuck Schumer, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, Congressman Adam Schiff, and 6 other individuals with classified identities. British intelligence led the spying operation, while the Hillary Clinton campaign, the DNC, and 4 other classified individuals paid Christopher Steele to create the dossier. John Podesta and Eric Holder then relayed the dossier to 9 individuals, including Senator John No Name McCain and 2 other unnamed senators. The dossier was funneled to the FBI via James Comey, who passed it up the chain to Loretta Lynch, then President Obama, and was used as predicate to initiate a FISA warrant to surveil candidate Trump's campaign. Obama overruled the president's daily briefing on December 8th, replacing it with one that erroneously blamed the 2016 election results on Russian hacking and ordered the creation of the Treasonous Intelligence Committee assessment. Senator No Name then shopped for a news outlet that would publish the dossier and found in BuzzFeed a useful idiot media outlet to do so. These actions created the public narrative that would prevent Trump's re-election or create an opportunity to remove him from office, as was attempted by Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. The ramifications are that the U.S. intel agency spied on a presidential candidate and president-elect in an operation supported by the Republican Congress, Republican Senate, complicit news media, and others. So, if that interpretation is directionally correct, the Olympic-level deep staters were absolutely involved in these crimes. But there's probably nothing to this interpretation to Q Drop 436, right? And even if all of this were true, how could the Children of Light possibly defeat an enemy this powerful? How the Children of Light throw the Olympians into the abyss. Do you remember how in July of 2016, FBI Director James Comey publicly announced the closing of the mid-year exam investigation into Hillary's email server? He broke protocol in making this announcement, going over the head of Attorney General Loretta Lynch in doing so. This was just 8 days after Lynch had secretly met with former President Bill Clinton on the tarmac of a private airport in Phoenix. Did you know some people think Lynch was offered a Supreme Court justice seat under Hillary's administration, so long as she closed down the mid-year exam investigation? Bonkers, I know. And why would Comey go through this flagrant violation of protocol in July, just to notify Congress the investigation was being reopened in late October, 11 days before the election? Why would his number 2, Andrew McCabe, the Clyde Tolson to Comey's J. Edgar Hoover, confirm 2 days later for the Wall Street Journal that there was a separate, ongoing investigation into the Clinton Foundation? This double whammy informed the American public that there were 2 active FBI investigations into HRC less than 2 weeks before the election. Hey, you don't think the Clintons could have been running the largest child trafficking network in the history of the world out of their foundation, do you? Could explain why Jeffrey Epstein claimed to be a co-founder of the Clinton Foundation and why the CF funded Ghislaine Maxwell's Terramar project, the shady nonprofit focused on shared ownership of international waters. Nothing suspicious about that, right? Is it possible, as Mel K and Sam Tripoli suggested, that Comey and McCabe did not have a choice? That they were forced to reveal the FBI had not one, but two open investigations into Hillary Clinton less than 2 weeks before the election? Could Eric Prince have been telling the truth about the disgusting crimes discovered on Anthony Weiner's laptop, which he alleges contained evidence of money laundering, underage sex, pay for play, and inappropriate handling, sending, and receiving of classified information up to staff-level special access programs? And didn't the Weiner laptop scandal and the announcement of the open FBI investigations take place just a few weeks after WikiLeaks released the emails of John Podesta, Clinton's campaign chairman? Emails which informed the public that the Obama-Biden-Clinton State Department had actively been funding and arming terrorists, and that his emails were littered with references to child trafficking and the occult, giving rise to the infamous scandal now known as Pizzagate? Is it possible that all of these events were interrelated? Could the DNC leak, the Podesta leak, the Weiner laptop, and the FBI's confirmation of the Clinton investigations all indicate a larger plan? A globally coordinated counterinsurgency to take down the deep state once and for all? And could the assassination of Seth Rich, Obama's treasonous intelligence community assessment, and the January 5th Oval Office meeting deframed Lieutenant General Michael Flynn indicate the Fabian pedophiles weren't going down without a fight? What if the inspiration to free our country from this monolithic and ruthless conspiracy never died with Jack and Bobby? What if a team of loyal patriotic leaders within military and intelligence took up their mantle, recognizing they would need to play the long game to free humanity due to the nature of the rulers? What if those tiny ripples of hope from Lincoln, JFK, and RFK grew into gigantic ripples of hope? Gigantic ripples of hope carried forward by Jack and Bobby's sons and namesakes, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. What if those ripples of hope also inspired their dear friend, Donald John Trump?
Thank you very much.
What if Donald Trump, Eric Prince, Steve Piaget, and military and intelligence leadership walked right through that sliding door moment in 2016, setting humanity on a course for freedom?
In order to stop this coup, we in the intelligence community and others involved have informally gotten together, and with their permission, I am beginning to announce that we've initiated a counter coup through Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. What has happened in effect when Comey had to open up the case of Hillary Clinton and discuss the emails that were involved with the Anthony Weiner case, it was not the case itself that was as important as the fact that this was the entree for many of us in the counter coup to say to the administration, we have your number. Not only do we have your number, we're going to stop you from making Hillary the president of the United States. And at the same time, we will convict and indict the president of the United States, Loretta Lynch, and many others who were involved in the cover-up of the massive corruption that occurred under the Clinton Foundation.
What if that same inspiration drove our warfighters in Benghazi the night of September 11th, 2012 to defy the odds? Which drove Mark Geist, Chris Peranto, John Teagan, Jack Silva, and Dave Boone Benton to defy the Satanists in charge of America and the terrorists in charge of Libya? Which drove them to move heaven and earth to get out of that hellhole, to survive, and to tell the tale of what really happened during those 13 hours in Benghazi, and to ensure that their fallen comrades and war heroes, Ty Woods and Glenn Doherty, did not die in vain. What if that same inspiration drove those closest to Ty and Glenn, including Ty's father Charles, to never stop searching for answers, to reject Hillary Clinton's argument that
the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make?
Because it makes all the difference in the world to understand why they were killed and why this evil bitch issued a stand-down order, leaving our men and women in Benghazi for dead. And what if that quest for truth connected others from the farthest corners of the earth on the same mission? Other heroes including Alan Perot, an American falconer in Central Asia, Julian Assange, an Australian journalist held political prisoner in the UK for over a decade, and Seth Rich, a DNC staffer from Omaha who paid the ultimate price for the truths he revealed. This quest for truth includes understanding what really happened to Extortion 17 on the night of August 6, 2011, and to ensure that the traitors responsible for this tragedy are held to account. And that again, the 30 Americans killed that night did not die in vain.
The flight crew of Extortion 17. David Rudolph Carter. Brian Joseph Nichols. Patrick Douglas Hamburger. Alexander James Bennett. Spencer Colson Duncan. Fly to glory.
Derek Benson. Brian Bill. Christopher Campbell. Jared Day. John Duang Dara. John Foss. Kevin Houston. Jonas Kelsall. Louis Langless. Matthew Mason. Stephen Mills. Nicholas Knoll. Jess Pittman. Thomas Ratzloff. Robert Reeves. Heath Robinson. Nicholas Spihar. Michael Strange. John Tummelson. Aaron Vaughn. Craig Vickers. Jason Workman. John Brown. Andrew Harvell. Daniel Zerbe.
What if the dramatic series of events surrounding the 2016 election represented the opening shots of the Second American Revolution? Except that this revolution would have to be fought like none other before it, due to the nature of the rulers. Fought concurrently on multiple planes: kinetic, psychological, and spiritual. What if the 2016 election represented, as President Trump said,
not merely transferring power from one administration to another, or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people.
What if, while the deep state perpetuated their multi-year coup against the American people, from the Russiagate hoax and Mueller investigation, to the Ukrainegate hoax and impeachment 1, the suppressed Hunter Biden laptop, the 51 spies who lied, and the rigged 2020 election, the January 6th Fedsurrection and impeachment hoax 2, the constant barrage of lawfare, the assassination attempts, reported and unreported? What if, while all that was happening, Trump and the White Hats were getting to work? That might explain what really happened at Ground Zero, New York City, on September 11th, 2016. Did you know that many have suggested Hillary Clinton's fainting spell looked more like she was being detained that day? That might explain why veterans like Derek Johnson have guided us to read the Uniform Code of Military Justice and how to understand military operations in continuity of governance. It might explain why they've drawn special attention to the Department of Defense Law of War Manual signed June 12, 2015. Just 4 days before Donald Trump famously descended the escalator at Trump Tower to declare his presidency and launch the greatest counter-coup in history. That might explain why they've drawn specific attention to the Military Justice Act of December 2016 and Federal Continuity Directive 1, signed 3 days before Trump 45's inauguration, and specifically to its definitions of devolution and reconstitution. It's why they've drawn attention to the Leibster Code of 1863, Geneva Conventions, Hague Conventions, and Nuremberg trials, as well as to Federal Continuity Directive 2 and Executive Orders 13818, 13848, 13912, and 13919 on serious human rights abuses and corruption, foreign election interference, military authority during times of national emergency, and the 2020 activation of reserve forces to active duty, respectively. It might explain why many refer to the foreign tour of President Trump's first term as the capitulation tour, in which the deep state leadership of those countries surrendered to the white hat-led counterinsurgency. Do you remember where President Trump went on his first foreign visit, May 20th of 2017? Saudi Arabia. King Salman welcomed President Trump to Saudi Arabia like no foreign leader before him. Trump was welcomed as if he'd been presented white male proof of the Saudi government's corruption and offered King Salman the option to join the White Hat's military alliance. I wonder how King Salman and soon-to-be Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman would have responded to such an offer. How about that Arda sword dance in which Trump joined the Saudis? It's almost like they were sending a signal, communicating the formation of an alliance, preparing for battle, and showing their unity against a common enemy. Could Trump and MBS have cemented their friendship later that year, when MBS may or may not have been in Las Vegas? Could President Trump have forewarned the Crown Prince of an impending assassination attempt at the Mandalay Bay/Four Seasons? 1 month later, could the first leg of the cabal's pyramid of power have fallen when Crown Prince MBS purged the Saudi government of its corrupt politicians? This includes by arresting dopey Prince Al-Walid, Bill Gates and Barry Obama's buddy, and by destroying Prince Mukreen's helicopter. Plus, cut. Did you see the way the Crown Prince received POTUS 47 when he visited Saudi Arabia this term? Quite the friendship between these two. It's almost like Crown Prince MBS is deeply grateful to President Trump for saving his life. Next up on the capitulation tour, Israel. When DJT visited Israel on May 22nd, 2017, he sent a clear message to the Zionist gangsters running Tel Aviv. No longer will we allow this group of Khazarian inbred mobsters to appropriate the faith of Judaism and to besmirch the good name of my people, the Jewish people. No longer will we allow the divinity of Torah to be defiled by the filth of the Talmud. We're moving America's embassy to where it belongs, the home of God and the tribes of Israel, Jerusalem. In September of 2020, President Trump would facilitate the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. A few years later, President Trump would be awarded a Keter Yerushalayim, the Crown of Jerusalem award from the Israel Heritage Foundation. Do you think there could be any deeper symbolism here? In July 2025, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu nominated President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, thanks to the Abraham Accords and the recent ceasefire Trump helped negotiate with Iran. We are saving Israel for last. Very specific reason, not mentioned a single time. Trump's capitulation tour continued with Vatican City. Oh, Pope Francis does not look too happy about their meeting. While he was there, President Trump told Pope Francis, "We're taking back America's gold from the Bank of the Vatican." 650 planes full of gold, to be precise. Earlier this year, after Pope Francis passed, he was replaced by Pope Leo, a man who I pray to God embodies the principles of Jesus Christ. A man I pray will expel the money changers and the child predators from the Vatican and the Jesuit order once and for all. And a man I pray that will bring to light the esoteric wisdom buried within the Vatican's vault, who will restore the sacred esoteric wisdom of the Freemasons, the Knights Templar, and the Rosicrucians, while freeing their lodges from the bondage of sexual blackmail and black magic. Trump's capitulation tour continued as he met with the EU and NATO. President Trump arrived late, and he made the European Union finally pay their fair share of NATO's defenses. They also capitulated in permitting the Brexit process to continue. When Trump 47 returned to Europe this year, he showed who was back in charge by hosting UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer at Trump's own property in Scotland. Back in the United States, Trump met with military leaders at the White House on October 6, 2017. After gesturing in the air what appeared to be the letter Q, he made this cryptic statement. "Do you guys know what this represents? Tell us, sir." "I don't know, maybe it's the calm before the storm." "Could be the calm before the storm." "What storm, Mr. President?" "You'll find out." 3 weeks later, we found out. An anonymous author, or team of authors, less than 10, began writing in the back corners of the internet. A place where only the most politically aware, or some would say paranoid, go to share ideas. The politically incorrect thread on 4chan. On October 28, 2017, at 4:44 and 28 seconds p.m., Q would reply to an anon on 4chan who had written, "Hillary Clinton will be arrested between 7:45 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. Eastern on Monday, the morning on October 30th, 2017. To this post, Q would add, quote, "HRC extradition already in motion effective yesterday with several countries in case of cross-border run. Passport approved to be flagged effective 10:30 at 12:01 a.m. Expect massive riots organized in defiance and others fleeing the U.S. to occur. USMs will conduct the operation while NG activated. Proof check. Locate a NG member and ask if activated for duty 10:30 across most major cities." End quote. There is Q. There are Anons. There is no QAnon. Q would drop 4,953 messages over President Trump's first term and another 13 messages between June and November of 2022. The intelligence shared by Q would spark a movement of digital citizen journalists determined to connect the dots and bring the truth to light. These journalists worked tirelessly to expose the deep state's crime, mostly operating anonymously to protect their lives and livelihoods. For the same reason James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay had written the Federalist Papers under pseudonym. These digital warriors became known as Anons and served as humanity's Paul Revere and Thomas Paine in the Second American Revolution. The Anons taught the world how to read Q's drops, how to recognize Q proofs, how to read the Q clock, and how to understand the significance of zero deltas. How many coincidences before mathematically impossible? The Anons learned the connections between drop number and military time. They kept the information battlefield in tippy-top shape. They allied with the greatest military counterinsurgency in history, providing the information roadmap to help awaken the normies and unite us all in universal friendship. The Anons sacrificed their free time and their sleep to build a community dedicated to finding the truth, to restoring representative government, and to ending child trafficking. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'This is what the Lord says. Let my people go so that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I am going to strike your entire territory with autistic frogs.'" In November of 2017, Trump's capitulation tour continued to Asia. On the 4th, Japan submitted, symbolized when President Trump became the first U.S. president to award the sumo champion trophy. In April of 2019, Emperor Akihito abdicated his throne, the first Japanese monarch to voluntarily step down since 1817. The capitulation tour continued with a major speech in South Korea on November 7th, warning North Korea against militarization. This speech set the stage for President Trump to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at the demilitarized zone 20 months later, becoming the first U.S. president to cross the DMZ. Next, Trump visited China and President Xi Jinping, who the prior spring had visited Trump in D.C. The two would dine in the Forbidden City, making Trump the first U.S. president to ever receive this invitation. It's almost enough to make you ask, what if China, Russia, and others are coordinating with POTUS to eliminate the New World Order? The capitulation tour continued with Vietnam on the 12th, in the Philippines on the 13th. Meanwhile, the 4chan threads were ablaze. On November 13th, 2017, Anons interpreted Q's drop 150 as openly taunting Grand Dame of the Rothschild family and Clinton associate Lynn Forrester de Rothschild. The letters in square brackets spelled out her initials, LDR. Lynn de Rothschild had sent a number of tweets in the days prior that appeared to be coded messages. These messages were targeted to people like Senator John No Name Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, Secret Service codename Eagle, and the Pope. Q again called attention to the Rothschilds on November 18th when drop 156 simply read ++, his code for the Rothschild family. The day before, 4 people had been killed in an air accident over the Rothschild property of Waddesdon Estate near Aylesbury in England. Eyewitnesses said a Cessna 152 descended onto a helicopter, causing the crash. The 2 individuals killed in the helicopter were Captain Mike Green and Captain Nguyen Tan Trung. Based on Anon decodes of subsequent related drops, they determined the helicopter had been on a mission to kidnap or assassinate Lynn and her husband Evelyn, but that it had been intercepted by a Cessna 152 piloted by a Rothschild operative. On December 6th, Q claimed, quote, HRC tried to cut a deal today. We said no. The next evening, he posted a number of pictures of powerful people which indicated the nature of the deal which had been declined. Hillary and Bill Clinton with an infant Chelsea, Lawrence Rockefeller, Pope John Paul II, Angela Merkel, Barack Hussein Obama, Huma Abedin, John Podesta, George Soros, George W. Bush, John No Name, Prince Charles, Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, Bashar al-Assad, Prince Harry, Queen Elizabeth, and Evelyn and Lynn Forrester de Rothschild. That evening, Q again taunted Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, who he/they claimed was browsing the message boards. Quote, L, heard you can't sleep anymore. Don't come here again. End quote. Q then mocked Rothschild with a hashtag fly Roths fly hashtag, a reference to her cryptic warning to Bill Clinton a few weeks earlier, hashtag fly Eagles fly, as Clinton's Secret Service codename was Eagle. The Anons joined in the fun, taunting her on the message boards. They were not disappointed when they got a response from an Anon user ID 78D855. Paul Ferber, also known as Baruch the Scribe, was on the boards that night and describes this extraordinary chain of events in his book, Q, Inside the Greatest Intelligence Drop in History. Quote, Lynn de Rothschild's first post on the Calm Before the Storm thread was a bit further down the thread. LOL drunk pic post Q, maintain your military bearing, she said. A little later she said, end of the Thursday night bottle, we all do it, to no one in particular. Anons wasted little time giving her something to reply to. One asked her to post again because he didn't have her location yet. And you never will, she replied. How's it feel to see it all crumbling, Lynn? Asked another, to which she replied that she was never even close to concerned. A drunk Lynn de Rothschild was posting on general discussion thread number 58 in response to a direct call-out from Q. Although it had been a long night, it was 5 a.m. in my time zone, I was still awake enough to be stunned at what I was seeing. This person at the very top of the hidden hierarchy had stopped by here to see what we all talked about, both because of Q's posts and the actions by the president and the US military behind the scenes. It remains perhaps the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen in my life. Of course she couldn't sleep. If it hadn't been for the suicide attack by her Cessna pilot a couple of weeks ago in Aylesbury, she and her husband would either be dead or sitting in Guantanamo Bay. And now her monstrous plan to cause a mass extinction event was down the tubes as well. When I first realized 2 years later the cause of this panicked reaction, the disarming of a nuke somewhere on US soil, possibly at Yellowstone, my thoughts went back to Hillary Clinton's email to de Rothschild asking what penance she owed for failing to arrange a meeting with Tony Blair. What penance would Lynn herself have owed for this failure to destroy the world? And to whom? Lucifer directly? No wonder she was putting away a couple of stiff drinks. She was probably in for a painful weekend. "I know how this ends, faggot," said one user. "Yes," she replied. "You die of thirst after watching your children die first. Hell is imaginary. Thirst is real. You will see soon, sweetie." After a few more lame responses to the Anons, including a dig at paper money, which she said was for puppets, she signed off with, "Bake bread, kids. We love it." And then she was gone. Anons took her advice and baked the next bread with the title Insomnia Edition. That was followed by Lynn for the Bake Edition. Q's taunt on November 13th, where he had told her that distress calls would do her no good as "we can hear you breathing," obviously also extended to her internet connection and what websites she was currently browsing. The hunters had indeed become the hunted. End quote. Wow. Sounds like Lynde Rothschild had a rough night back in December of 2017. Sounds like she may be in need of some therapy. Or maybe more like a noose at Guantanamo Bay. Now, I don't know about you, but my water's been flowing just fine. The Rothschild family, on the other hand, well, they've been having some trouble. In 2023, the Rothschild family held their first ever auction to sell off millions in family treasures. Earlier that year, Lynn's husband, Sir Evelyn de Rothschild, died at the age of 91. Fly, Roths, fly! Then in February of 2024, Evelyn's cousin, Lord Jacob, the fourth Baron Rothschild, died at the age of 87. Sending his condolences to the Rothschild family, Sir Tony Blair said he would miss his friend immensely. Bye-bye, Mr. Burns. Plus, cut. 10 days after the Anon, who may or may not have been Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, had her epic meltdown, something went down at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta. On December 17th of 2017, the airport was shut down for over 10 hours after a fire caused extensive damage to an underground facility. The next day, the Q would drop a string of messages related to the airport power outage. The Anons determined that an operation had taken place to extract someone from Atlanta to the Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. Drop 365 mentioned the target had been extracted to a special place. Coincidentally, President Trump's tweet the prior day described his wonderful weekend at Camp David as a very special place. But who could have been extracted? When an Anon asked which pawn was off the table or whether it was someone higher, Q replied that it was a bishop, specifically of the cult. You don't think it could have been George Soros, do you? Two months earlier, George Soros had transferred the bulk of his personal wealth, $18 billion, to his Open Society foundations. Why did Soros transfer his bulk public funds to a nonprofit? On October 31st, Q had stated, "P.S. Soros is targeted." Then, on December 11th, he/they had said, "We have a really special place picked out for GS." Really special. It's probably all just a coincidence, though, right? Plus, cut. Next spring, the capitulation tour continued when President Trump walked into the lion's den of Davos, Switzerland. Trump was given the seat of honor at the World Economic Forum on January 26, 2018, where he forced the submission of the bankers and corporate CEOs. A few months later, Crown Prince MBS visited Silicon Valley and met with tech leadership including Google, Apple, Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft, and Amazon, symbolizing the puppet strings of Prince Al-Walid had been cut. Meanwhile, a bombshell exploded in the multi-year Russiagate hoax/attempted coup. In February of 2018, Congressman Devin Nunes, the Republican chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, released a document which came to be known as the Nunes Memo. This memo declassified and updated the HIPSI's ongoing investigation into the Crossfire Hurricane investigation into Donald Trump's campaign team. Specifically, the memo updated facts related to the Department of Justice and the FBI's use of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, to surveil Carter Page. Page was a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign during the 2016 election. The explosive document revealed that 1. The Steele dossier, funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC, formed an essential part of Carter Page's FISA application. The FISA application and its 3 renewals omitted the political origins of the Steele dossier, even though it was known to FBI and DOJ leadership that entire time. 2. The FISA application extensively cited a September 23, 2016 Yahoo News article by Michael Isikoff. The article did not corroborate any information in the FBI's warrant application because Steele himself had provided the information to Isikoff. 3. Before and after the FBI terminated Christopher Steele as a source for leaking information to the press, he maintained contact with the DOJ via then Associate Deputy Attorney Bruce Orr. Bruce Orr's wife, Nellie Orr, was then working for Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS is the same firm that had been contracted by Hillary Clinton's campaign via her law firm Perkins Coie. Fusion GPS subcontracted the opposition research into Donald Trump to Christopher Steele's firm, Orbis Business Intelligence, and a series of their memorandum became known as the Steele dossier. Nellie Orr and Fusion GPS funneled the Steele dossier and related opposition research to her husband, Bruce. Bruce Orr then funneled it to the DOJ and FBI leadership. 4. FBI leadership admitted the FISA warrant would not have been possible without the Steele dossier, and that the dossier was known at the time to be salacious and unverified. And 5th, Peter Strzok, the FBI agent who opened the Crossfire Hurricane investigation into Donald Trump, demonstrated clear anti-Trump political bias in his text messages with his mistress and FBI colleague, Lisa Page. One of my favorite examples of the Strzok-Page adulterer's political bias took place on January 4th. This was the day before President Hussein Obama and his advisors held a notorious Oval Office meeting where they decided to frame Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, Trump's incoming national security advisor. The Crossfire Hurricane team had intended to shut down the Crossfire Razor sub-investigation into Flynn. Strzok had intended to close it down due to lack of evidence that Flynn, the former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, was acting on behalf of Russia. But when Strzok and Page received the orders from their superiors in the deep state, they had this exchange. Strzok: Razor still open. Smiley face with an @ symbol emoticon. Bit serendipitously good, I guess. You want those chips and Oreos? Page: Phew! But yeah, that's amazing that he is still open. Good, I guess. Strzok: Yeah, our utter incompetence actually helps us. 20% of the time, I'm guessing. Smiley face emoticon. Why was the deep state so desperate to get Flynn out of Trump's administration? Could it be that he was a loyal patriot who had served as the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency? Could it be because he knows where the bodies are buried and he was ready to dig them up? General Flynn was the first casualty of the Russiagate hoax when the entrapment schemes of Crossfire Razor led to POTUS 45 forcing Flynn's resignation on February 13, 2017, less than 1 month into his presidency. Although what if the truth is more complicated? Is it possible that Flynn wasn't exactly fired? Could Trump and Flynn have conducted a feint against the deep state? As Sun Tzu recognized millennia ago, all warfare is based on deception. Do you think it's possible General Flynn has been serving as the White Hat Alliance's national security advisor ever since? Hypothetically? While the mainstream media ignored the profound implications of the Nunes memo, the damage was done, the truth rose like a lion, and the Russiagate hoax began its descent into the underworld. You should also know that the memo was written by Congressman Nunes' staffer, Kashyap Patel, who ran the HIPSI's Russiagate investigation. The same Kashyap Patel years earlier had been part of the Department of Justice's criminal investigation into the Benghazi atrocity. The same Kashyap Patel was intimately involved in the investigation of Seth Rich's murder. The same Kashyap Patel is today the director of the FBI. Kashyap Patel. That's a name to remember. Back to President Trump's capitulation tour. French President Emmanuel Macron was next. Macron visited President Trump in Washington, D.C. in April of 2018. Macron had entered politics after his meteoric rise as a banker at Rothschild & Co. Macron is married to a man named Jean-Michel Trogneau. I mean, a woman named Brigitte Macron. You know, the mannish-looking woman who almost looks like she could be Macron's father. Brigitte began her relationship with Emmanuel Macron when she was 39 and Macron was 14. This classic tale of statutory rape led to the marriage between Brigitte Trogneau, now Brigitte Macron, and Emmanuel Macron. Thanks to the investigative reporting of Javier Poussard and Candace Owens, people around the world have started to question whether Emmanuel's spouse was really born Jean-Michel Trogneau. And if Jean-Michel transitioned to a woman, then stole his sister's identity, what happened to the real Brigitte Trogneau? If we look further back into the families of French royalty, nobility, and political leadership, do you think we'll find more weird stories about rape, incest, child abuse, stolen identities, and gender transitions? Speaking of families with weird histories of rape, incest, child abuse, stolen identities, and gender transitions, next up on the capitulation tour was the British royal family. Her Royal Highness, the Queen of England, showed her capitulation to President Trump when she allowed him to walk in front of her during the review of the honor guard. President Trump then told the Queen, "Move over, you old satanic hag," and stood under the royal sigil in the center position. The Queen also had POTUS sit in Winston Churchill's chair, again symbolizing the fall of the Committee of 300. Queen Elizabeth II died on September 8, 2022, and was succeeded by her eldest son, creepy King Charles. As discussed earlier, King Charles had fathered Princess William and Harry with the late, great Princess Diana. After Princess Di died under suspicious circumstances, some would say was discarded, Prince Charles remarried then Princess, now Queen Camilla. King Charles III was coronated on May 6, 2023, and many thought the Grim Reaper himself made an appearance. Foreshadowing, perhaps, that the child-murdering British royal crime family is done? On July 27, 2018, the Deep State launched missiles at Air Force One in an assassination attempt that received zero coverage from the mainstream media. Thankfully, POTUS rerouted the flight and escaped unscathed. Now, if I learned anything from Omar in The Wire, it's that
you come at the king, you best not miss.
Well, guess what, Deep State bitches? You fucking missed. Just like you did 7 years later in Butler, Pennsylvania. Fight, fight, fight!
Fight, fight, fight. Thank you.
The capitulation tour continued in Helsinki on July 25th, 2018, when Russia's President Vladimir Putin tossed President Trump a soccer ball. The action looked like it could have symbolized two teammates playing a game against a common opponent. Do you remember when Hillary Clinton committed that felony when she had her minions delete over half of her State Department emails despite being under subpoena? Going so far as to use the computer software BleachBit to prevent recovery of those emails? Splintering those emails into 1,000 pieces and scattering them into the wind?
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
What if Russia was listening? Could those splintered emails have risen like a phoenix from the ashes of cyberspace and landed directly in the hands of Q+? Is it possible that new Putin is not bad? It's almost enough to make you ask, what if China, Russia, and others are coordinating with POTUS to eliminate the New World Order? They are. Then on October 2nd, 2018, Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Why was Khashoggi killed that day? Well, it's interesting to note that Jamal's uncle, Adnan Khashoggi, was a Saudi arms dealer instrumental in the Iran-Contra affair. Jeffrey Epstein had close ties to Adnan Khashoggi, and it's widely speculated that the two of them colluded on illegal arms dealing and money laundering. Could their illicit dealings have extended to human and drug trafficking? Adnan Khashoggi died in July 2019, 10 months after his nephew's death. Could Jamal Khashoggi's death have served as a warning from Crown Prince MBS to the remaining deep state subversives in Saudi intelligence? That don't fucking try it, your time is done. President Trump continued the capitulation tour with Argentina in November of 2018 at the G20 summit, followed by hosting Brazil's President Bolsonaro in March of 2019. And did you know that cult leader, human trafficker, and friend of Oprah Winfrey, John of God, was arrested shortly thereafter? On December 5th, 2018, all living presidents and their spouses gathered for George H.W. Bush's funeral. Did you know that the Bushes, Clintons, Obamas, Bidens, and Pences all received suspicious-looking letters that day? I wonder what they said. I mean, Jeb Bush looks like he saw the Grim Reaper after he read his. When an anon asked what were in the envelopes, Q replied, "Our promise to counter." And did you notice how H.W. Bush's flag was wrinkled on his casket? Isn't that military code for traitor? Wasn't the flag on Senator John No Name's casket covered in wrinkles at his funeral 3 months earlier? That might explain why former Ohio Governor John Kasich said,
It's like 24 hours since John McCain was put to death.
That might also explain why we don't say this fucking traitor's name. In December of 2018, President Trump declared victory against ISIS in Syria, withdrawing U.S. troops after cleaning up the dirty war started by the Obama administration. The following year, special forces would successfully eliminate the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
3 years ago, the barbarians of ISIS held over 20,000 square miles of territory in Iraq and Syria. Today, the ISIS territorial caliphate has been 100% destroyed, and the founder and leader of ISIS, the bloodthirsty killer known as al-Baghdadi, is dead.
Peace through strength. When he returned to the presidency in 2015 after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, he initiated a path towards normalizing relations with Syria by eliminating sanctions. In December of 2019, Trump kicked off the Space Force, the first new military branch since the Air Force launched in September of 1947. You know, just 2 months after that whole Roswell UFO thing. The U.S. Space Force is responsible for organizing, training, and equipping Guardians to conduct global space operations that enhance the way our joint and coalition forces fight. Makes you wonder what's really going on within Space Force. The submission tour continued with India in February of 2020, shortly before the COVID lockdowns. India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, submitted to Trump. Modi dropped comms of capitulation by clasping his hands together to show that they were tied.
Namaste, Trump! Namaste, Trump!
Back home in the United States, the Federal Reserve submitted on March 2020. During COVID, the Federal Reserve took a backseat to the Treasury Department for the first time in over 100 years. The Fed submitted and paid out all liquidity while our Treasury secured their assets. When President Trump 47 got together with Fed Chairman Jerome Powell in July of 2025, Powell was clearly unhappy with the visit. His facial expressions recalled that of Pope Francis's meeting with President Trump 8 years earlier. 2 weeks after this meeting, President Trump removed Billy Long from his role as Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service and placed his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, as acting commissioner. You don't think Trump and Bessent could be preparing to do something truly revolutionary, like, say, eliminating the IRS and dissolving the Federal Reserve and replacing them with the quantum financial system? Ending the centuries-long hegemony imposed on us by the central banking industrial complex? Beginning a golden age of economic prosperity, the likes of which humanity has never seen before? If If you've been getting punched in the face by inflation the past 5 years as much as I have, then Nasara Gasara can't come soon enough. Speaking of the COVID pandemic, did you notice how the virus's release and the subsequent lockdowns were timed perfectly to maximize disruption of the 2020 election? It's almost enough to make you ask, is this about the virus or the election? The public will inevitably learn the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, and at this point, everyone with half a brain knows we need to be investigating the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But to discover the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, we'll need to go even further back in time on a journey that will undoubtedly lead us to the biolabs located in the deep state stronghold of Ukraine. It'll lead us to names like Senator Barack Obama, whose first international trip as a U.S. Senator in 2005 was to Ukraine. That trip led to the signing of the Non-Lugar Cooperation Agreement meant to counter the threat of bioterrorism and to prevent the proliferation of biological weapons technology. Is it possible this mission achieved exactly the opposite of its stated goal? It'll lead us to companies like Metabiota, the Ukrainian pandemic preparedness company marketed as digitizing the microbial world. What Palantir is to the CIA, Metabiota is to the USDA. It'll lead to Metabiota's investor, Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners, the private equity firm founded by Hunter Biden, Devon Archer, and John Kerry's stepson, Christopher Hines. It'll lead to Metabiota's founder, Nathan Wolff, and his good friends / human traffickers, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. It'll lead to Rosemont Seneca's other shady Ukrainian investment, Burisma, and its financial beneficiaries including Joe Biden, John Kerry, Vadim Pazarsky, Mykola Zlochevsky, and Igor Kolomoisky. It'll lead to the U.S. State Department, Hillary Clinton, Victoria Nuland, and, of course, George Soros, the International Renaissance Foundation, and the Open Society Foundations. It'll lead to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DITRA, to Black & Veatch, to USAID, to the National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA, and In-Q-Tel. It'll lead to Metabiota's collaborators, the NIH, NIAID, EcoHealth Alliance, and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and to Tony Fauci, Bill Gates, Deborah Birx, Peter Daszak, Xi Zhengli, Ralph Barrick, Jeremy Farrar, Major General Chen Wei, and George Gao. It'll lead to David Leiter and his lobbying firm ML Strategies. Hunter Biden engaged Leiter on behalf of Burisma and was instrumental in landing a Burisma-USAID partnership. You're never going to guess which other shady Ukrainian business landed a juicy USAID contract. That's right, Metabiota. Since 2014, Metabiota and EcoHealth Alliance partnered together as part of USAID's PREDICT project. PREDICT seeks to predict and prevent global emerging disease threats. Do you guys think it's strange that Metabiota's VP of Science and Technology Administration, Mary Gutierrez, provided Hunter Biden with, quote, concepts to assert Ukraine's cultural and economic independence from Russia and continued integration into Western society, end quote. What could asserting Ukraine's independence from Russia have to do with pandemic preparedness? David Leiter is married to Tamara Luzzatto, Senator Hillary Clinton's former chief of staff. The same Tamara Luzzatto, on October 8, 2015, sent an email to a group of freaks, including her husband, John and Mary Podesta, and reporters from the Washington Post and NPR. Luzzatto's freaky email stated, quote, with enormous gratitude to advanced man extraordinaire Haber, I am popping up again to share our excitement about the reprise of our gang's visit to the farm in Lovettsville. And I thought I'd share a couple more notes. We plan to heat the pool, so a swim is a possibility. Bonnie will be Uber service to transport Ruby, Emerson, and Maeve Luzzatto, 11, 9, and almost 7, so you'll have some further entertainment, and they will be in that pool for sure. End quote. It's almost like she was excited to pimp out her grandchildren to a group of disgusting pedophiles. Another fun email from Luzzatto to Podesta and others on BCC had the subject line, "Farmer Lighter Bounty Available for Pickup or Delivery." In the body of the email reads, quote, "Hi everyone, David and I are in town and back with the final tidal wave of fresh produce. Beets, tomatoes, onions, chard, hot peppers, red potatoes. About to do errands and anyone not next door, the farmer, aka my Uber, is happy to drop off anything you'd like. Just email and your wish is our delivery command." End quote. Do you think there's a chance she's speaking in code and they're delivering something other than fresh produce to their elite friends in Washington, D.C.? In their investigation of John Podesta's emails and Luzzatto in particular, the Anons found a site called Evie's Crib. The woman who runs this site bears a striking resemblance to Luzzatto, has a bunch of kids surrounding her in an image with the title, "Grand Tam and the Luzzattettes." Did you know that high priestesses of the Illuminati are called Grand Dames? The caption about an infant reads, quote, "Evelyn is growing up, and soon she will be the queen of the entire US of A. Right now, for a limited time only, you can spend some time with her online, raw and uncut. Take advantage of this now, as in the future she will have the power of life and death over you." End quote. The caption of another picture reads, quote, "With a new dude to boot. Evie doesn't know it yet, but she is looking forward to many visits to the farm with cousins Ruby, Emma, and Maeve." End quote. You may recall Ruby, Emma, and Maeve are the names of the children in the heated pool email. It's almost like these disgusting freaks have been using Ukraine as a central hub for all kinds of criminality, including child trafficking and bioweapons development. These people are sick. It's almost like President Putin's 2022 invasion had nothing to do with Hitlerian aspirations to conquer Europe. Rather, what if it had everything to do with executing a special military operation that would prevent these labs from releasing bioweapons targeted for genocide against the Russian people and to eliminate the depraved criminal enterprises operating within the country? And you know how President Trump has repeatedly emphasized that Operation Warp Speed saved millions of lives? Is it possible that he's not referring to the clot shots developed by Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and AstraZeneca? Rather, could he be referring to the fact that the expedited vaccine process prevented the years-long lockdowns that had been planned by the deep state, and that it saved millions of Americans from our horrifying intended fates in FEMA death camps? Then we get to November 3rd, 2022, the 2020 US presidential election, the most secure election in history, unless you count all of the blatant fraud. The deep state threw everything they could into pushing Trump out of office, with an emphasis on the swing states of Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And of course, the help of Venezuelan electronic voting machines. It almost makes you wonder if the insurrection didn't occur on January 6th, 2021, but rather on November 3rd through 7th of 2020. And if there was rampant election fraud in 2020, I sure hope someone has the evidence to prove it. Hey, what do you think is really going on within Space Force? So then what actually happened on January 6th? Outside of its obvious use as a false flag instigated by deep state operatives to slander Trump's supporters as insurrectionists and to lay the groundwork for lawfare that could be used to prevent Donald Trump from running for president in the future. Could President Trump have invoked the Insurrection Act of 1807? Did you know that on January 6th, the U.S. Congress violated the Constitution after there were 2 objections to the vote counts? When Congress returned from the Fedsurrection delay, they rushed through and counted the rest of the votes, rather than going into a joint session as the Constitution Mandates. Have you noticed how the government's US flags have all been gold fringed since January 6th of 2021, as if to signify admiralty courts? Did you know that on January 6th, Defense Secretary Christopher Milley approved 6,200 National Guard troops to support DC? If they were just there to ensure a safe transition through the inauguration on January 20th, then why did National Guard troops stay until March 3rd? And speaking of the inauguration, how weird was it that Trump 45 left office to a 21-gun salute by the Presidential Salute Battery with a marching band playing a Hail to the Chief with 17 gold-fringed flags? What's the 17th letter of the alphabet? And even weirder, Trump 45 left office as the only departing president to do so on Air Force One while carrying the nuclear football. Meanwhile, dead man walking Biden was given a military funeral at the tomb of the unknown soldier. I mean, Joe Biden was inaugurated as the 46th president of the United States. He was greeted with 21 guns by a three-piece volley, not to be confused with the 21-gun salute. For some reason, they forgot to play Hail to the Chief at the Capitol building that day, even though that's the inauguration song. And when Joe and Jill arrived at the White House that day, the doors didn't open. Whoops. Poor chairman, big guy Joe Biden. He sure had a rough go of it in those 4 years he was in office. I bet he almost wishes he'd been replaced by an actor in a mask. You know, come to think of it, President Biden never quite looked the same as his former self. But if Joe Biden had been replaced, what could have happened to the real one? Hey, what do you think has been going on at Guantanamo Bay the past few years? Do you think Gitmo would be a logical place to hold military tribunals for the largest organized crime syndicate in the history of humanity? I wonder if Vice Admirals John G. Hannock, Darce Crandall, and Christopher French could help answer these questions. Did you know that journalist Catherine Herridge launched her new investigative series about Guantanamo Bay on President Trump 47's inauguration day, January 20th, 2025? She dropped the news at 17:17 p.m. Eastern. What's the 17th letter of the alphabet? You know what they say, follow the pen. If the White Hat Alliance was prosecuting this racketeer-influenced and corrupt organization, or RICO case, from Guantanamo Bay, that might explain why the number of sealed indictments has skyrocketed since President Trump first took office in 2017. For a criminal investigation of this magnitude, it'd probably help to have someone like America's mayor on your team. You know, Rudy Giuliani, the same guy who brought down the 5 families of the New York mob as a prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, or the SDNY. You know, the man who's spent a career as a patriot and public servant, including holding New York City together after the 9/11 attacks. The man who's been a lifelong friend of Donald Trump, defending him against the Ukrainegate impeachment hoax, litigating on behalf of election integrity after the 2020 theft, and subjecting himself to character assassination in order to bring Hunter Biden's laptop to the public. I bet Rudy even still has relationships with the SDNY. You know, that critically important jurisdiction handling the Wiener laptop, the Clinton Foundation, the Epstein investigation, and the Ukraine investigation. Speaking of Hunter Biden, do you think it's possible he intentionally left his laptops at that repair shop in Delaware? Perhaps to get revenge on his father for his troubled life? Or maybe he was even acting under duress. President Biden's administration went from a foreign policy of peace through strength to one of utter mayhem. Our military's reputation was devastated when his team botched the Trump administration's plans for the Afghanistan withdrawal. The disaster led to the deaths of 13 U.S. soldiers who were killed by a suicide bomber at Abbey Gate. Rest in peace to Marine Lance Corporal David Lee Espinoza, Marine Sergeant Nicole Gee, Marine Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover, Army Staff Sergeant Ryan Naus, Marine Corporal Hunter Lopez, Marine Lance Corporal Riley McCollum, Marine Lance Corporal Dylan R. Marola, Marine Lance Corporal Kareem Nikui, Marine Sergeant Johanny Rosario Pichardo, Marine Corporal Humberto Sanchez, Marine Lance Corporal Jared Schmitz, Navy Hospitalman Maxton Soviak, and Marine Corporal Dagan William Tyler Page. Gone, but not forgotten. President Biden's administration followed the Afghanistan travesty by doing everything in their power to provoke Russia into invading Ukraine, risking the outbreak of nuclear war by doing so. This includes when Vice President Kamala Gypsy Curse Harris said at the Munich Security Conference,
I appreciate and admire President Zelensky's desire to join NATO.
Despite the fact that Putin had made it clear for decades that this was a red line which he could not accept. It's almost like President Biden's foreign policy was a continuation of the deep state neocons' push to force us into World War III. Then on October 7th, 2023, Hamas terrorists committed atrocities on the Israeli people on October 7th. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his Mossad/IDF leadership allegedly allowed the massacre to occur in order to initiate crisis and to maintain his feeble hold on power. The attacks led to the tragic deaths of 1,195 people and to the kidnapping of 200 Israeli civilian and soldier hostages. The Israeli government and their partners in the United Nations/NGO industrial complex responded by blockading Gaza, creating a human rights atrocity of the highest magnitude. It's almost like the entire operation has been aimed at a genocide of 2.2 million Gazans aimed at advancing the Greater Israel Project to steal land from the Palestinians and other Arab neighbors, rather than as appropriate retribution for the October 7th attacks. Back in action, President Trump 47 would continue his efforts towards peace through strength, this time negotiating a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Iran. The Panicans were especially worried during the 12 Days War after the United States conducted precision strikes on Iran's nuclear sites at Fordow and Natanz on June 23, 2025. How did President Trump maintain such composure through a military operation so complicated and risky? Is it possible he recognized Ayatollah Khomeini as a figurehead leader of Iran? Is it possible President Trump knew he had already eliminated the real leader of Iran 5 years earlier when Special Forces killed Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian National Guard, the IRGC?
The terrorist responsible for killing Sergeant Hake was Qasem Soleimani, who provided the deadly roadside bomb that took Chris's life. Soleimani was the Iranian regime's most ruthless butcher, a monster who murdered or wounded thousands of American service members in Iraq. As the world's top terrorist, Soleimani orchestrated the deaths of countless men, women, and children. He directed the December assault and went on to assault U.S. forces in Iraq, was actively planning new attacks when we hit him very hard. And that's why last month, at my direction, the U.S. military executed a flawless precision strike that killed Soleimani and terminated his evil reign of terror forever.
Peace through strength. The Iran nuclear strikes mirrored events that took place in North Korea September of 2017. This 6.3 megaton earthquake, allegedly triggered by a North Korean nuclear missile test, collapsed their nuclear research facility inside of Mount Mantap. Perhaps it wasn't exactly the North Koreans who triggered this earthquake. This event catalyzed the path towards normalizing relations with the United States, and 21 months later, Trump became the first American president to cross the DMZ. On July 31st, President Trump's press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, highlighted POTUS's successes as a peacemaker.
The president has now ended conflicts between Thailand and Cambodia, Israel and Iran, Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, India and Pakistan, Serbia and Kosovo, and Egypt and Ethiopia. This means President Trump has brokered, on average, about one peace deal or ceasefire per month during his 6 months in office. It's well past time that President Trump was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
8 days later, President Trump brokered a peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan, ending a 35-year conflict. The next day, the leaders of both countries jointly threw their support behind President Trump winning the Nobel Peace Prize, joining Pakistan, Israel, Rwanda, Gabon, and Cambodia in the recommendation. As of the publication date, there remains concern whether the Iran and Israel ceasefire can be made permanent, and whether President Trump will be able to broker peace deals with the remaining hotspots, including Russia and Ukraine, Israel and Gaza, and China and Taiwan. But the potential for world peace has never been greater. Trump 47's administration has a chance to finish the job, wipe out the deep state, complete the greatest sting operation of all time, and bring the military-industrial complex to heel. If he does, he'll lead the world on a path towards universal nuclear weapons disarmament, to a path of universal prosperity and unity consciousness, in which we finally give peace a chance. But hey, maybe there's nothing to any of this. Maybe the French monarchy died out with the long 19th century, and the British, Saudi, and the rest of the royals today are simply flamboyant remnants of the old world with no power. Maybe the Rothschild, Soros, Rockefeller, Gates, Podesta, and DuPont families are philanthropists, and the central banking monetary system has been a smashing success. Maybe nothing bad has ever happened in American society besides the evil orange man who convinced 63 million, then 74 million, then 77 million racist, sexist, xenophobes to vote him into office. Maybe Q is a fat guy in his underwear, giggling to himself in his parents' basement about how he deceived hundreds of millions of people around the world. And maybe oil is the liquefied remains of dinosaur bones. But I don't think so. I think we're on the precipice of a great victory for good in the eternal battle against evil. And as we head into this next age of humanity, it's gonna be biblical. So, grab your popcorn and enjoy the show, because nothing can stop what is coming. And my fellow Americans,
the best is yet to come.
Where we go one, we go all. And to President Donald Trump, Q+, our Commander-in-Chief, POTUS 45 through 47. Thank you, we love you, and we are with you. Call the ball. Time will tell whether we're in the mirror phase of the greatest military-civilian alliance in history, or whether we've still got some wood to chop in taking down the deep state. But we know how the story ends. The cabal miscalculated. The principles upon which the United States of America were built may have been a ruse, a tool to deceive the public into thinking we'd broken free from monarchy when their control really just went underground. But the ideals of freedom and self-determination had been sowed, and the resolve to defend government of, by, and for the people hardened within the American people and people around the world over the subsequent centuries. The people of humanity have spoken, and we've chosen the Great Awakening over the Great Reset. There will be no great political smash. Nearly signing that devious UN-WHO pandemic treaty was the closest humanity will ever come to abandoning our sovereignty. Good wins, evil loses. Suck it, Satan. As I mentioned, I have faith that we are on the precipice of a great victory in this eternal battle of good versus evil. And if you don't mind some more metaphysical speculation, I think we will soon learn the true meaning of the great work. Because you see, the cabal's great work was always destined to fail. They provided the dark side of the great work, a necessary part of human development, no doubt, but only one side of the process. because you see, the completion of the great work involves the fulfillment of our destiny, the self-actualization of humanity's infinite potential. The great work and the path of initiation. Since the Age of Enlightenment, humanity has been trapped in a flawed paradigm of reality based on materialism, reductionism, and determinism. One of the fundamental errors of this paradigm mandates that humanity's growth is driven by evolution, and that evolution happens gradually over the course of millions of years. Our understanding of evolution derives from Charles Darwin's theories of evolution by natural selection, or survival of the fittest. Coincidentally, the ruling oligarchs of the past 2 centuries have used Darwin's theories to justify colonialism, elitism, and white supremacy. Although maybe it's not so surprising when you learn that Darwin and his family were friends with the Huxleys, and the Darwins were also heavily involved in the British Eugenics Society. Charles Darwin's magnum opus, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, had a subtitle of Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Favored races, also known as eugenics. In their deception, the scientific and technological elite have hidden the knowledge that humans have another path available to us in addition to the path of evolution. We have another option than the long cosmic journey of life and death, returning again and again through the wheel of samsara. Instead, we can choose the path of initiation. Earlier, I mentioned my faith that Pope Leo XIV restores the esoteric knowledge of early Christianity in its affiliated mystery schools. In my own studies of the mysteries, again and again I encounter the knowledge of the path of initiation and how it serves as the keystone to unlocking humanity's future. In Venice McNeil's Magical Egypt series, The Great Work, Georgia Lambert expands.
The mysteries have to do with the movement from evolution to initiation. Humanity en masse has been riding the tides of evolution. This is a sort of unconscious cause and effect kind of learning. And eventually, the waves of evolution, which are long and slow and tidal with their ups and downs and cycles repeating themselves, people can always change, but they rarely choose to. And so they'll repeat the same kind of relationship over and over again. Just because you've gone through something doesn't mean you're finished with it karmically. You're only finished with it when you get the lesson. And so humanity en masse is on these tidal kind of evolutionary cycles and waves. But eventually, these waves of cause and effect, unconscious evolution, toss you up on the beach. And at that point, you're sitting on the sand, and now movement becomes self-initiated. At that point, when evolution has brought you to the point where your physical self is sort of finished off and your emotional self is finished and workable and free and under some control, and your mind is developed, these are the 3 steps leading up to the porch of the temple. That when that happens, now you're on the beach. You're cast up on the beach. And now it is your choice as to when and how fast you move. And this is the transition from evolution to initiation. Initiation is self-consciously chosen evolutionary development. And the mysteries had to do with taking those evolutionary steps at a much faster rate than the rest of humanity. And so the training of the mystery school was to take that evolutionary development physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually to the next level. to the next step. And so it is self-initiated growth and development.
Egyptian cosmology was rooted in the mystery schools, and they well understood both paths. The path of evolution and the path of initiation are represented in the stories of two principal netters or archetypes, Osiris and Horus. Osiris, the god of the afterlife, fertility, and resurrection, was murdered and dismembered by his brother Set, only to be revived by his wife Isis, allowing him to rule the underworld. Horus, their son, is often depicted as a falcon-headed god of the sky, kingship, and protection. Horus avenged his father by battling Set, ultimately claiming the throne of Egypt. These narratives symbolize cycles of renewal, justice, and divine order. Osiris, the path of evolution, represents the cyclical journey of transformation through death, rebirth, and karmic resolution, emphasizing gradual spiritual evolution via reincarnation and moral judgment. In Lion King terms, this is the path of Mufasa. Horus, the path of initiation, represents the path of valor, the path of moral courage. The path of Horus, or Simba in the Lion King myth, represents the core of the mystery schools. That humans can access a direct path of divine realization and liberation without the need for repeated incarnations. The mystery schools go even deeper, providing explicit instructions as to how one can achieve the path of initiation in his or her present incarnation. That is the true essence of the great work. The great work reveals the roadmap for the unfoldment of humanity's divine, infinite potential. Venice McNeil explains further.
The formula for the great work is contained in the symbolic windows of the tarot. The structure of the universe, its mirrored structure in consciousness, and timeless procedures for accelerating one's evolution by rising back up the ladder out of materiality. Not only do these greatly misunderstood symbol systems contain eerily accurate schematics of the psyche and roadmaps to accessing higher levels of consciousness, but they go even further to reveal to the initiate the answer to the central mystery of existence. Who am I? Or the same question asked a different way. What is consciousness? In each initiatic system, this question is addressed by its central myth, the identity which the initiate assumes. In each allegory, we see that beneath all the symbolic variations, they all tell the same story of consciousness on its journey through existence, the forces which comprise and shape it, and the ways it can be perfected.
If you'll humor me with one final piece of metaphysical speculation, I'd propose that Jesus Christ chose the path of initiation. My own perspectives on the life lessons and resurrection of Christ have been shaped predominantly by the non-commodity Gospels, the New Testament, and William Henry's research on the Ascension teachings. The historic and archaeological record supports the possibility that Jesus Christ was a student of the mystery schools. There's a gap in the New Testament of 18 years between Jesus age 12 and when he begins his ministry at the age of 30 that are unaccounted for. I suspect he spent much of that time traveling the world and learning sacred knowledge from a variety of cultures. Christ's incarnate life took place at a significant juncture point in human evolution, for he ushered in the transition in the zodiacal calendar from the age of Scorpio into the age of Pisces. It is because he manifested at the dawning of the age of Pisces that Christ is often associated with the fish. Christ lived before the Library of Alexandria was burnt to the ground by religious zealots, while it still housed the knowledge of the ancient world. The Greeks' Eleusinian mysteries were in full swing, and the Vedic knowledge of India accessible to travelers from Judea. Humanity today is at a similar juncture point in history as we transition from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. I believe that at these transition points in the cycles of time, the rate of change speeds up. I believe that Christ's message was never that he alone was God. He did not teach that he sits on a throne above the rest of us, as the Merovingian vampire in the 13th seat of the hierarchy proclaims to be the ruler of the earth. He was not intended to suggest that we must bow down to Christ as inferiors, in the way that the cabal supplicates to Baphomet and Maul and Moloch and Pindar. But rather, Christ's message is that we are all expressions of God's creative intelligence. We are divinity, experiencing the divine. Enfolded within us is infinite possibility, including the ability to transcend life and death itself. The kingdom of God is within you. Jesus Christ and his 12 apostles do not represent an hierarchical structure. Rather, this fractal pattern represents a universal formula of our manifest reality. The golden ratio, or Fibonacci sequence, structures existence. It starts 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, which in aggregate sum to 12. From one many, and out of many one. That even set, the scar archetype that divides, has divine purpose. Because only through the experience of duality can we remember the love of unity. I believe that we're at the precipice of a new golden age for humanity. A time for spiritual evolution, cosmic peace, and universal wisdom, where we complete the great work and collectively transcend the limitations of our material existence, where humanity follows in the footsteps of the path laid by Jesus Christ and fulfills the prophecy of his ultimate teaching, ascension. With that possibility in mind, I'd like to leave you with the final 3 chapters of the book of Revelation, the last book of the New Testament. The book of Revelation, or the Revelation to John, describes an angelic vision presented to John while he was imprisoned on a penal colony at Patmos. The vision describes the events that would usher in the next age: the destruction of Babylon, the New Jerusalem, and the glory of Christ's return at the Parousia. The 1,000-year reign. Then I saw an angel come down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the abyss and a heavy chain. He seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, which is the devil or Satan, and tied it up for 1,000 years, and threw it into the abyss, which he locked over it and sealed, so that it could no longer lead the nations astray until the 1,000 years are completed. After this, it is to be released for a short time. Then I saw thrones. Those who sat on them were entrusted with judgment. I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, and who had not worshipped the beast or its image, nor had accepted its mark on their forehead or hands. They came to life, and they reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were over. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over these. There will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for the 1,000 years. When the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison. He will go out to deceive the nations at the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand in the sea. They invaded the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the holy ones in the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them. The devil who had led them away was thrown into the pool of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophets were. There they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. The large white throne. Next I saw a large white throne and the one who was sitting on it. The earth and the sky fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. I saw the dead, the great and the lowly, standing before the throne, and scrolls were opened. Then another scroll was opened, the book of life. The dead were judged according to their deeds, by what was written in the scrolls. The sea gave up its dead, then death and Hades gave up their dead. All the dead were judged according to their deeds. Then death and Hades were thrown into the pool of fire. This pool of fire is the second death. Anyone whose name was not written in the book of life was thrown into the pool of fire. The new creation. The new heaven and the new earth. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The former heaven and the former earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I also saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, God's dwelling is with the human race." I heard, "He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will always be with them as their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death or mourning, wailing or pain, for the old order has passed away." The one who sat on the throne said, "Behold, I make all things new." Then he said, "Write these words down, for they are trustworthy and true." He said to me, "They are accomplished. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give a gift from the spring of life-giving water. The victor will inherit these gifts, and I shall be his God, and he will be my son. But as for cowards, the unfaithful, the depraved, murderers, the unchaste, sorcerers, idol worshippers, and deceivers of every sort, their lot is in the burning pool of fire and sulfur, which is the second death." The New Jerusalem. One of the 7 angels who held the 7 bowls filled with the 7 last plagues came and said to me, "Come here, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." He took me in spirit to a great high mountain, and showed me the holy city Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It gleamed with the splendor of God. Its radiance was like that of a precious stone, like jasper, clear as crystal. It had a massive high wall with 12 gates, where 12 angels were stationed, and on which names were inscribed, the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. There were 3 gates facing east, 3 north, 3 south, and 3 west. The wall of the city had 12 courses of stones at its foundation, on which were inscribed the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The one who spoke to me held a gold measuring rod to measure the city, its gates, and its wall. The city was square, its length the same as also its width. He measured the city with the rod and found it 1,500 miles in length and width and height. He also measured its wall, 144 cubits, according to the standard unit of measurement the angel used. The wall was constructed in jasper, where the city was pure gold, clear as glass. The foundations of the city wall were decorated with every precious stone. The first course of stones were jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the 9th topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th hyacinth, and the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls, each of the gates made from a single pearl, and the street of the city was of pure gold, transparent as glass. I saw no temple in the city, for the temple is the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb. The city had no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gave it light, and its lamp was the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and to it the kings of the earth will bring their treasure. During the day its gates will never be shut, and there will be no night there. The treasure and wealth of the nations will be brought there, but nothing unclean will enter it, nor anyone who does abominable things or tells lies. Only those will enter whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. Then the angel showed me the river of life-giving water, sparkling like crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the street. On either side of the river grew the tree of life that produces fruit 12 times a year, once each month. The leaves of the trees serve as medicine for the nations. Nothing accursed will be found there anymore. The throne of God and the Lamb will be in it, and his servants will worship him. They will look upon his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. Night will be no more, nor will they need light from lamp or sun, for the Lord God shall give them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. Epilogue. And he said to me, "These words are trustworthy and true. And the Lord, the God of prophetic spirits, sent his angel to show his servants what must happen soon. Behold, I am coming soon. Blessed is the one who keeps the prophetic message of this book. It is I, John, who heard and saw these things. And when I heard and saw them, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel who showed them to me. But he said to me, 'Don't. I am a fellow servant of yours and of your brothers the prophets and of those who keep the message of this book. Worship God.' Then he said to me, 'Do not seal up the prophetic words of this book, for the appointed time is near. Let the wicked still act wickedly, and the filthy still be filthy. The righteous must still do right, and the holy still be holy. Behold, I am coming soon. I bring with me the recompense I will give each according to his deeds. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Blessed are they who wash their robes so as to have the right to the tree of life and enter the city through its gates. Outside are the dogs, the sorcerers, the unchaste, the murderers, the idol worshippers, and all who love and practice deceit. I, Jesus, sent my angel to give you this testimony for the churches. I am the root and offspring of David, the bright morning star. The Spirit and the bride say, 'Come.' Let the hearer say, 'Come.' Let the one who thirsts come forward, and the one who wants it receive the gift of life-giving water. I warn everyone who hears the prophetic words in this book. If anyone adds to them, God will add to him the plagues described in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words in this prophetic book, God will take away his share in the tree of life and in the holy city described in this book. The one who gives this testimony says, 'Yes, I am coming soon.' Amen. Come, Lord Jesus. The grace of the Lord Jesus be with all."
Hands together we stand tall, hope in our hearts we give our all. Beyond the stars we send our call, trusting in him, his name we call. 45th to 47th time, through storms and clouds we've seen the signs. Prayer and fast and hearts aligned, to save our land we draw the line. Because he loves us, hear his voice, guiding light renews our choice. I'll rescue him will be our song, protect our land where we belong. Through the valleys and the heights, fervent prayers and darkest nights, with faith so strong our future's bright. In his hands we see the light. 1,000 whispers in the wind, prayers that reach where love begins. Fast and broken blessings mend, together we will rise again. Because he loves us, hear his voice, guiding light renews our choice. I'll rescue him will be our song, protect our land where we belong. Through the valleys and the heights, fervent prayers and darkest nights, with faith so strong our future's bright. In his hands we see the light. 1,000 whispers in the wind, prayers that reach where love begins. Fasting broken blessings mend, together we will rise again. Because he loves us, hear his voice, guiding light renews our choice. I'll rescue him will be our song, protect our land where we belong.
You guys know what this represents?
Tell us, sir.
Maybe it's the calm before the storm.
What's the storm?
Could be the calm before the storm.
What storm is
We have the world's great military people in this room, I will tell you that. And we're going to have a great evening. Thank you all for coming.
What storm, Mr. President?
You'll find out.